Tonight, we do not tell a story meant to comfort. We return to a time before comfort existed, before law, before justice, before the sky had a name and the earth knew its weight, before gods ruled, before men prayed. There was only silence, and something older than silence itself. This is not a tale of heroes winning wars or monsters being slain. It is a story of power born from fear, of fathers devoured by their own legacy, of sons who overthrow only to become what they despised. It is the story of gods who bled like men, and men who suffered like gods, of fate that cannot be escaped, only understood, of love that creates worlds and destroys them, of myths that never truly died, only changed their dwelling. So wherever you are listening from, let the present fall quiet, because what follows is not ancient history. It is the memory of the world learning how to be human. Good evening, and welcome back. Tonight we step into a realm that predates history, a world shaped not by record or reason, but by memory and myth. Wherever you are listening from, allow the present to fall quiet. Settle in, grow comfortable, and let the oldest stories unfold. Before Olympus had a name, before earth knew solidity, before sea learned depth or sky learned height, there was only chaos. Not chaos as modern speech understands it, not noise, confusion, or disorder, but something far more ancient. Chaos was older than language, older than meaning itself. It was an immeasurable void, a vast openness without shape, direction, or purpose. It was neither cruel nor kind, neither hostile nor gentle. It did not judge, desire, or decide. It simply existed. From this primordial emptiness came the first movements of being. Gaia emerged, the earth immense and unmoving, a foundation that did not seek existence, yet bore it all the same. Beneath her, open Tartarus, the abyss below the earth, dark, dreadful, and endless, a depth destined to hold what even gods would one day fear. Alongside them arose Os, the force of love and desire, the unseen bond that would draw separate things together and make creation possible. These were not gods as mortals would later imagine them, but elemental realities given form, the first answers to the silence of chaos. Then came Nyx, the night, wrapped in shadow so dense that even the void recoiled from her presence. With her followed Erebus, the darkness of the underworld, settling beside her in that early stillness where sound itself had not yet learned to echo. From the union of night and darkness were born ether, the pure upper air breathed by the gods, and Hera, the day, destined from her first moment to pursue her mother endlessly across the sky. Thus, the rhythm of night and day was born not through science or calculation, but through myth, through a lineage of unseen beings who brightened and dimmed the heavens with each passing hour. Gaia, the earth herself, did not remain idle. Patient and fertile, she brought forth from her own body Uranus, the sky vast and scattered with stars. He was both her son and her consort. When he stretched himself across her, arching high above, the world found its first true shape, a broad earth beneath a domed and endless sky. Gaia also gave rise to the mountains, tall and untamed, and to Pontus, the sea, restless and willful long before ships or sea monsters ever disturbed its waters. Together, earth and sky became the first great pair, and from their union came the Titans, the earliest generation of mighty beings who ruled the cosmos long before Zeus and his kin ever rose to power. There were 12 Titans in all, 6 sons and 6 daughters, each vast and elemental, each embodying forces that shaped existence itself. Oyanis, the encircling river; Hyperion, Lord of Light; Kois, the Seeker; Kus, bearer of the constellations; Ipitus, ancestor of humankind; and Cronus, the youngest, sharp-eyed and cunning, whose quiet nature concealed careful thought. Among the daughters were Thea, radiant mother of sun and moon; Rhea, future mother of gods; Theis, embodiment of divine order; Mnemosyne, keeper of all memory; Phoebe, the shining one; and Tethys, whose nourishing waters sustained the world. Yet Gia's womb was not finished. She bore children of another kind as well, beings of raw strength and dreadful form. First came the Cyclopes, Brontes, Steropopes, and Argus, each with a single blazing eye set in the center of the brow, like a living forge. They were the smiths of lightning, powerful and straightforward, fearing neither god nor giant. After them came the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones, colossal and terrifying, each with 50 heads and 100 arms, capable of shaking the foundations of the world when angered. Uranus, though lord of the sky, trembled at the sight of these monstrous offspring. Ashamed and afraid of their grotesque power, he drove them back into Gia's womb, forcing them into the depths of the earth and sealing them beneath layers of stone and sorrow. Gia groaned beneath their weight. The earth, once nurturing and proud, now suffered with every breath. It was in this pain that her resolve hardened. But that is a tale for another time. For now, remember this. In the oldest age, before law or justice, before sword or plow, the world was shaped not by hands, but by force, union, and grief. Chaos gave rise to the first forms. But it was Gia, the Great Mother, who gave them ground upon which to stand. The union of Gia and Uranus, earth and sky, was the first great marriage of the cosmos. It was not a union blessed by witnesses or ritual, but one born of necessity and nature. The sky pressed itself upon the earth night after night, holding her beneath his star-strewn body. From their joining came the Titans and other mighty offspring, but also a deep and growing sorrow. Uranus, though vast and proud, was a jealous and fearful father. Where Gia saw strength, he saw threat. With revulsion rather than wonder, he condemned the Cyclopes and the 100-handed giants, casting them back into the earth where no light reached and no voice could be heard. Gia groaned beneath their burden, not only from the agony of bearing them once more, but from the betrayal of her consort, the sky who should have cherished what they created together. Night after night, Uranus descended upon her, pressing heaven against earth, blind to her suffering and deaf to her grief. At last, she could endure no longer. From her own flesh, she fashioned a weapon, not of bronze or iron, for such things had not yet been conceived, but a great sickle of unyielding flint, jagged as truth and sharp as vengeance. She went to her Titan sons, the firstborn and mightiest among them, and revealed her pain. One by one, they turned away, fearing their father's power. Only Cronus stepped forward, the youngest, the most watchful, the one whose patience hid resolve. "I will do it," he said. "Give me the blade." Gia set her trap. She waited for Uranus to descend as he always did, laying himself across her in the darkness. And from the shadows, Cronus struck. With steady hand and without hesitation, he brought the sickle down. The sky shuddered with Uranus's cry as the blade severed the source of his power. Cronus cast the bloodied flesh into the sea, and from the crimson foam rising upon the waves, something new was born, a figure of impossible beauty, both terrible and irresistible. From the white froth came Aphrodite, goddess of love and desire, who would one day cause kings to fall and empires to burn. She stepped ashore at Cyprus, radiant and serene, untouched by the violence of her origin. Gia's vengeance did not end there. From the blood that struck the earth sprang the Furies, cloaked in shadow, hunters of oath-breakers and kinslayers. From it also rose the giants, destined to challenge the gods themselves, and the Meliae, nymphs of the ash trees, guardians of ancient wilderness. Uranus, wounded and dethroned, vanished into the heavens, leaving the world to his children. Before he fled, it is said he spoke a final curse, one that would echo through time. Just as I was overthrown by my son, so too shall he be overthrown by his own. It was not a prophecy he invented, but a truth Gia had already whispered, and Cronus heard it clearly. Cronus took the throne of the sky and wrapped himself in power. Yet from the moment he grasped it, fear took root. Thus ended the reign of Uranus, first king of the cosmos, and began the age of the Titans. Still, even as the sky loosened its grip and the world breathed anew, something stirred within the womb of time. The Titans stood tall beneath open heavens, freed from their father's rule, and Cronus, youngest and most cunning among them, claimed dominion over all. He was not a god of open cruelty or wild chaos, but he ruled with caution and suspicion. The sickle that had brought down Uranus was hidden away, buried in earth, or lost to the sea, its blade unseen yet remembered, like a secret sin etched into the world itself. Cronus had freed his mother and his siblings, yet from the moment he sat upon the throne of the cosmos, his mind was haunted. His father's final words echoed within him like a second heartbeat, a reminder that power seized through blood is never secure, and that one day he too would be cast down. From their closeness, life multiplied, but harmony did not follow. What was born from the union of earth and sky was not only strength, but an unease that slowly thickened like a gathering storm. For Uranus, vast and radiant as he was, carried a heart ruled by suspicion. He did not look upon his children with awe. He looked upon them with fear. In the beings Gaia brought forth those of immense size and unsettling form. Uranus saw not the future of the cosmos, but the end of his rule. The Cyclopes, with their blazing, solitary eyes, and the many-limbed giants, whose movements could unsettle the world itself, filled him with dread. Their power offended him. Their existence threatened him. And so, with cold resolve, he chose erasure over understanding. He drove them back into the depths of the earth, forcing them into the very body that had birthed them. There, beneath stone and unbroken darkness, they were sealed away where no light could find them, and no sound could rise to the surface. The earth bore them once more, not as children, but as prisoners. Gaia cried out. Her suffering was more than physical pain. It was the wound of betrayal. The sky, who should have shared her reverence for creation, had violated the sanctity of her womb. Again and again, Uranus descended upon her, pressing the heavens down upon the earth, unmoved by her anguish, unmoved by the lives he had condemned to silence. At last, endurance turned into resolve. From her own substance, Gaia shaped an instrument of reckoning, not forged by fire, for fire was yet young, but torn from the raw bones of the world, a crescent blade of hardened stone, sharp, merciless, and final. With it in her grasp, she called upon her Titan sons and revealed the truth of her torment. One by one, they recoiled. Power had taught them fear, and fear had taught them obedience. All but one. Cronus, the youngest, stepped forward, quiet where others were loud, patient where others hesitated. His gaze did not waver. He accepted the blade without ceremony, knowing well the cost of what he agreed to do. The moment came as it always did. The sky lowered himself upon the earth, blind in his certainty. From concealment, Cronus rose. There was no hesitation, no mercy. The strike fell, and with it the reign of the first king was undone. The heavens convulsed as power was severed, and the blood of Uranus spilled into the waiting sea. From that mingling of violence and water emerged something wholly new. Desire given form, beauty born of ruin. Aphrodite rose from the foam, untouched by the brutality that had made her possible. Radiant and dangerous, a force that would bend hearts and topple empires long after the Titans were dust. Nor was that the end of Gaia's reckoning. Where blood struck the land, other beings arose, spirits of vengeance that would hunt those who broke sacred bonds, giants destined to challenge the gods themselves, and nymphs bound to ancient trees, guardians of a world older than law. Uranus, broken and displaced, withdrew into the far reaches of the sky. Yet before vanishing, he left behind a truth sharper than any blade. The one who overthrows shall one day be overthrown. It was not invention, but inevitability, an echo of the cycle Gaia herself embodied. Cronus ascended. The sky throne was his. Thus ended the first dominion of the cosmos, and thus began the age of the Titans. The earth, no longer crushed beneath an unyielding heaven, seemed to breathe freely for the first time. The Titans stood upright beneath the open sky, unshackled from their father's shadow. Yet peace did not take root. Cronus ruled not with the reckless cruelty of Uranus, but with vigilance sharpened by fear. The blade that had secured his power was hidden away, buried or cast beyond reach, yet never forgotten. Though he had freed his siblings and delivered his mother from torment, the warning spoken by his dying father pulsed within him like a second heart. Power had been taken, and power, once taken, demanded constant defense. Even as the Titans celebrated their freedom, time itself carried the seed of the next upheaval. For the cycle had not been broken, only delayed. The warning did not fade. It deepened. The truth spoken by a dying sky did not remain a memory. It became an instinct. Cronus carried it within him like a shadow stitched to his spine. What was done to the father would one day be done to the son. And so, as ruler of all things, he did what kings have always done. He secured lineage. He chose a queen. Rhea, his sister, stood beside him. She was not chosen for weakness, but for balance. Where Cronus was guarded and calculating, Rhea was composed and enduring. She carried within her a strength that did not announce itself, a wisdom shaped by patience rather than force. Together, they presided over an era later generations would struggle to name, remembering it only as a time before pain learned its language. Poets would call it a golden age. The world, still young, was gentle then. Mortals walked the earth without fear of hunger or war. Seasons did not wound. The land gave freely, without demand for sweat or blood. There were no walls, no weapons, no temples raised to plead with unseen powers. Justice did not need to be enforced. It moved quietly, like breath, like instinct. Doors were left open because nothing yet stalked the night. But peace, like all things born of power, was fragile. When Rhea bore her first child, Cronus felt the old terror awaken. The curse tightened around his thoughts. He did not pause to wonder. He did not allow love to grow roots. The moment the child was placed in his hands, he acted. The infant vanished into him, swallowed whole, erased from the light before a name could take hold. It happened again, and again, and again. Each birth reopened the wound left by his father's final words. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon. One by one, they were taken, hidden within their father's body, alive yet unseen seeds, locked in darkness, denied the world they were meant to shape. Cronus called it necessity. He called it wisdom. He told Rhea that the throne demanded sacrifice, that history could not be allowed to repeat itself. But Rhea knew the truth. This was not caution. It was fear devouring its own future. She wept, but tears have never dethroned kings. 5 times she gave birth. 5 times she was emptied. And with each loss, something within her hardened. When the 6th child stirred within her, she chose defiance over obedience. She fled, far from the halls of the Titans, beyond the reach of Cronus's gaze. Rhea found refuge on a rugged island where mountains clawed at the sky and caves cut deep into the earth. There, hidden among shepherds, nymphs, and ancient stone, she gave birth to her youngest son, Zeus. From the moment he entered the world, he carried an air of inevitability. His first cry did not plead, it echoed. The trees shuddered. The wind answered. His eyes opened with an awareness too sharp for an infant, and when his hand closed around his mother's finger, it did so with a strength that felt less like muscle and more like destiny. To deceive the king of Titans, Rhea wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth and presented it as her child. Cronus, consumed by certainty and haste, swallowed it without question. The ritual completed, the threat, he believed, erased. But beneath the slopes of Mount Ida, Zeus lived. He was raised in secrecy, guarded by warriors who clashed shields and stamped the earth to drown out his cries, so that no sound might betray him. He was nourished by the divine goat, Amalthea, whose milk hardened his bones and sharpened his spirit. From her broken horn came abundance without end, a symbol of plenty born not from conquest, but from care. When Amalthea died, Zeus honored her not with mourning, but with eternity, placing her image among the stars, a quiet promise that memory, too, could be immortal. Yet, Zeus was not shaped for solitude. The blood in his veins carried rebellion. The silence of the mountains taught him patience. The wind taught him listening. From whispered stories by firelight, he learned of the world he had been denied, of siblings trapped in darkness, of a father who ruled by consuming his own future. As he grew, the earth began to stir once more. Gaia had not forgotten. Her suffering had merely been postponed. The Cyclopes and the 100-handed giants still lay buried in Tartarus, their rage pressing against the foundations of the world. Through dreams and waking thought, she reached Zeus. Her voice did not command it, reminded of injustice, of cycles, of what must be undone. She guided him first to Metis, embodiment of cunning wisdom. With her counsel, Zeus learned that strength alone would fail. Cronus was not merely powerful, he was time itself. To strike him required foresight, sharper than any blade. And so, the plan began to take shape. Not with thunder, not with armies, but with patience, deception, and inevitability. Victory would never be claimed by force alone. Against a ruler who embodied time itself, brute strength was insufficient. What was required was guile, thought sharpened to a blade. Zeus returned to his father not as a challenger, but as a servant. His presence was masked, his purpose hidden beneath obedience. With the guidance of Metis, whose mind bent reality more effectively than any weapon, he carried with him a drink prepared with care. It was rich and heavy, sweet on the tongue, bitter in the throat, a mixture designed not to kill, but to undo. Cronus drank without suspicion. The potion worked its way through the Titan's vast form, stirring what had long been suppressed. his body convulsed, his certainty shattered, and at last, with a sound like stone breaking apart, the past returned. From him emerged the children he had consumed, not broken, not diminished, but whole. They did not come forth as infants robbed of time, but as fully formed gods, radiant with power refined in darkness. Fire stepped into the world first, embodied in Hestia. Fertility followed in Demeter, bearer of grain and life. Then Hera, proud and unyielding, sharp-eyed and destined for command. After her came Hades, grave and silent, already carrying the weight of endings. Last emerged Poseidon, restless and roaring, the sea answering his breath. For the first time, the six stood together beneath the open sky. They did not rejoice. They remembered. Cronus rose in fury, but the moment had passed. What had been hidden was now visible. What had been swallowed now stood armed. Yet, Zeus's victory was far from certain. The Titans answered their fallen king's call. Brothers and sisters gathered beneath ancient banners at the old stronghold of the south, a mountain shaped by ages before war learned its name. Some remained apart. Oceanus withdrew into his endless flow, choosing distance over bloodshed, but others did not hesitate. Coeus, Creus, Hyperion, Iapetus. They armed themselves not only with strength, but with centuries of dominion. Thus began the war later ages would struggle to describe. The Titanomachy. For 10 relentless years, the cosmos tore itself apart. The sky burned, the earth cracked, mountains split open, and seas rose where land had been. Thunder rolled without pause, fire rained from the heavens, and winds howled as if the world itself screamed beneath the weight of its masters at war. The Titans held the ancient heights, rooted in the authority of the old order. Zeus and his siblings made their stand upon a younger peak, a mountain untouched by history, but destined to redefine it. Again and again, the conflict reached no conclusion. Power met power, strength met strength. The world endured, but only just. Gaia watched. She had seen this pattern before. She knew that the balance would never tip while ancient forces remained buried. And so she spoke again quietly, insistently guiding Zeus toward what had long been denied. The imprisoned ones. With his siblings beside him, Zeus descended into the deepest places. Gates older than memory were broken. Chains laid by fear were shattered. From Tartarus rose the Cyclopes and the 100-handed giants, freed at last from darkness and silence. Their gratitude was not spoken, it was forged. To Zeus, they gave the thunderbolt, concentrated sky and storm, a weapon not merely of destruction, but of command. To Poseidon, they granted the trident, dominion over every wave and current. To Hades, they bestowed a helm that erased presence itself, rendering him unseen. The Hecatoncheires followed them to war, hurling mountains as easily as stones, overwhelming the Titans with the fury of forces long denied release. The balance broke. The Olympians advanced with relentless force. The Titans fell back. Cronus fought without surrender. But prophecy is not defeated, it is fulfilled. One by one, the old rulers were cast down, driven from the high places of the world. Zeus did not destroy them. He imprisoned them. Deep into Tartarus they were hurled, bound by unbreakable chains and sealed behind gates that time itself could not erode. Only a few were spared, those who had seen the future more clearly than the past and chose alignment over defiance. The war ended. The skies cleared. The fires dimmed. The world, scarred and reshaped, began the slow work of healing. Zeus claimed the throne, not by inheritance alone, but by action, judgment, and the completion of fate. Yet even as he took his place among the heavens, the echo of his grandfather's curse lingered like a warning carried on the wind. For power, once seized, is never permanent. When silence returned, and the earth lay still beneath a renewed sky, the victors stood among the remnants of creation. The old order had been broken, but conquest had given way to something far more difficult: rule. And the gods would soon learn that to govern a world is a challenge no war can resolve alone. With the war ended, another trial emerged, one not of fire or steel, but of order. The world that lay before the victors was vast, untamed, and crowded with forces that had yet to be named. It was a living thing, still finding its balance. No single hand, no matter how powerful, could claim it entirely without inviting another catastrophe. The scars of the Titan War were still fresh, and the memory of brothers turning against brothers was too near to ignore. Zeus stood at the center of this fragile dawn. He had not been the first to draw breath, but he had been the first to act, first to dare, first to break the old order. His strength was unquestioned, his judgment sharpened by conflict, his presence commanding. Yet even he understood that absolute rule would plant the seeds of another war, this time among kin bound by blood and shared victory. At his side stood his brothers, forged by the same battles, shaped by the same suffering. Poseidon, whose fury had driven the seas into chaos, and whose calm could still them again. And Hades, who had moved unseen through war and shadow, carrying the weight of endings without complaint. Each had earned his place, each had shed blood, each had risked everything. The cosmos itself demanded balance, and so the three did not argue. They did not threaten. They did not test strength against strength. Instead, they turned to fate, the same force that had guided prophecy, whispered through Gaia, and bent the course of the Titanomachy itself. They cast the lots, not as a game, but as a sacred act. Bone struck stone, silence followed, and when the signs were read, the world reshaped itself into three great dominions. To Zeus fell the heavens. The boundless sky became his throne, the winds, the clouds, the rain, and the open air between mountain and star. Thunder answered his voice. Lightning marked his will. From the heights of Olympus, he ruled as king not merely by power, but by command of the space where gods and fate alike moved. The eagle soared as his herald, carrying his gaze across the world. To Poseidon fell the waters. The seas in all their moods bowed to him. Oceans, rivers, springs, and storms answered the call of his trident. Beneath the waves, he raised a realm of shifting halls and coral light, ruling not only over currents and tides, but over ancient beings that had swum the depths before gods ever walked the land. The sea was his domain, beautiful, violent, and endlessly restless. To Hades fell the realm beneath. The underworld was not a crown many would desire, but Hades accepted it without protest. His kingdom lay hidden beyond sunlight, a place of shadow and stillness where all mortal paths would one day end. There he ruled with unyielding order, judging the dead, guarding the riches buried in the earth, metals, gems, and secrets long forgotten. Though feared, he was just. Though distant, he was faithful to the laws that governed life and death alike. The earth itself remained unclaimed. Gaia's body was not divided. Mountains rose without allegiance. Forests grew untamed. Fields belonged to those who worked them. It was a shared realm where gods might walk unseen, and mortals might glimpse divinity, where ambition could grow, and where fate continued its quiet labor. Thus, the cosmos found structure, sky above, sea around, underworld below. The three brothers swore an oath no war among themselves, lest the world fracture anew. Thrones were raised, courts were formed, followers gathered. High above the clouds, upon Mount Olympus, Zeus summoned the gods. They came from every corner of existence. His sisters stood beside him, Hera, sharp-eyed and unyielding, Demeter, whose presence awakened the land, and Hestia, keeper of the sacred flame that warmed gods and mortals alike. Others joined them, Athena, born of wisdom and war, Apollo, radiant and far-seeing, Artemis, swift and silent, Ares, blood-marked and relentless, Hermes, quick of step and thought, Hephaestus, scarred yet brilliant, and Aphrodite, whose beauty bent even the will of kings. This was the birth of a new order. The age of Olympus had begun, yet even as the thrones were set and the realms divided, the world did not rest. The gods, for all their might, were not immune to pride or desire. And below them, mortals were stirring, learning, building. The heavens had been claimed, but peace, as the world would soon remember, is never permanent. When the noise of war finally dissolved into memory, and the scars of battle were left to cool beneath open skies, the world entered a fragile calm. Light returned slowly, touching mountains and seas that had been torn apart by divine conflict. From this quiet emerged a new center of power, not born of conquest alone, but of survival and order. Mount Olympus rose as that center. The Titans had ruled from the southern heights, from a mountain shaped by age and severity, a place bound to storms and the weight of an older world. Olympus stood apart from that legacy, farther north, higher, and untouched by the ruin of the Titan War. Its peak disappeared into cloud and story alike. It was not simply elevated ground, it was a crossing point. Below it lay the realm of mortals, bound by breath and time. Above it began the domain of gods, where flesh endured without decay and will bent the air itself. Here, Zeus established the new seat of rule. The court that formed upon Olympus bore no resemblance to mortal kingdoms. There were no roads worn by feet, no banners marking borders, no sentinels watching for threat. Such things were unnecessary. The height itself was protection. The thinness of the air marked a boundary no mortal body could cross unaided. Olympus knew no storm, no rot, no winter. Its halls were shaped from marble and vapor, solid yet luminous. Starlight arched across its ceilings. Wind wandered its passages as though invited. This was not a place of omens or shadows. Here, the gods stood openly, fully revealed, radiant, formidable, unmistakably alive. At the summit sat Zeus. He took his place, not as a conqueror, reveling in victory, but as a ruler, shaped by endurance. His throne was forged of thunder and presence. His authority did not rest solely on force, though none rivaled his strength, but on memory of war survived, of alliances forged, of fate fulfilled. His voice rolled like distant storms. His gaze reached beyond cloud and horizon, touching futures yet unwritten. In his grasp rested the thunderbolt, gift of the Cyclopes, embodiment of judgment decisive, irrevocable. Yet the rule of Olympus was never solitary. At Zeus's side stood Hera, queen of gods, not by ornament or courtesy, but by right. She embodied marriage, sovereignty, and the binding force of sacred union. Her power did not announce itself with lightning or fire. It endured. She remembered every oath spoken and every slight committed. Her jealousy was not impulsive, but patient, and it would one day shape the paths of gods and mortals alike. Her crown was not bestowed, it was earned, hardened by betrayal, and sealed by the inviolable laws of Olympus. Demeter followed, bearer of growth and sustenance. Where she passed, the earth softened. Seeds answered her presence. Crops rose and withered by her favor alone. She did not remain always among marble halls, choosing instead to walk the lands below, watching over fields, families, and the fragile cycle of life. Quiet and ancient, her power was unquestioned. Without her blessing, no city could endure. Hestia stood at the heart of Olympus, firstborn of Cronus and Rhea. Last to emerge from darkness, she sought no renown. She claimed no grand temple, waged no wars, inspired no epic songs. Her domain was the hearth. She tended the eternal flame at the center of the god's home and guarded every fire lit in mortal dwellings. Where warmth gathered families, Hestia was present. Her power did not command it sustained. As long as fire burned, she endured. In time, younger gods joined the court. Athena came foremost among them, not born of flesh, but of thought. When Zeus swallowed Metis to forestall prophecy, he believed wisdom contained. Instead, it matured within him. From pain and rupture, Athena emerged fully formed, armored, spear in hand. Her gaze was clear, unclouded by impulse. She became wisdom, sharpened into strategy, war-bound by reason. A guardian of cities, a virgin warrior intolerant of folly. Apollo and Artemis followed, children of Leto, born after long wandering and denial. No land dared shelter their mother, fearing Hera's wrath. At last, a drifting island offered refuge, and there the twins were born. Apollo shone with order and clarity, god of light, prophecy, music, and healing. Artemis moved with silent grace, guardian of wild places, huntress beneath moonlight. Together, they embodied a new generation, restless, radiant, and firmly rooted within the order Zeus had forged. Their power did not exist in isolation. From the beginning, the gods of Olympus were bound sometimes unwillingly to the mortal world below. Their actions rippled outward, shaping lives they would never fully understand. And it was within this fragile balance that new figures took their places among them. Ares emerged as the embodiment of conflict itself. Born of Zeus and Hera, he carried divine blood yet inspired little affection among his kin. He was violence stripped of restraint, fury untempered by purpose. Wherever he went, bloodshed followed. Battlefields answered his presence, and chaos delighted him. Yet for all his strength, he was rarely victorious against strategy or foresight. Wisdom and patience outmatched him time and again. And though mortals feared his name, they seldom prayed for his favor. Opposite him stood Hephaestus, master of forge and flame. His origins were spoken of in whispers and contradictions, born of Hera alone in defiance, or cast from Olympus by Zeus in anger. Whatever the truth, his body bore the cost. He walked with difficulty, his form marked by imperfection. Yet in his hands lay genius. Fire obeyed him, metal bent to his will. From his craft came weapons, armor, palaces, and living mechanisms shaped from bronze and thought. Where others ruled by command, Hephaestus ruled by creation. Though mocked, he was indispensable. Aphrodite followed, untouched by lineage or womb. She rose instead from the sea itself, born of ancient violence transformed into allure. When she stepped upon the shore, beauty entered the world as a force both irresistible and destructive. Desire followed her like breath. Bonds were forged and broken in her wake. Gods and mortals alike fell under her influence, and even Zeus found limits to his authority over her. Love, in her hands, was never gentle. It promised pleasure and delivered consequence. Last among this early assembly came Hermes, son of Zeus, and the nymph Maia. He belonged everywhere and nowhere. From his first breath, he moved faster than boundaries could contain. On the day of his birth, he stole cattle, masked the theft with song, and negotiated his forgiveness before his steps had grown steady. Winged sandals bore him across realms. He carried words between gods, guided souls to their rest, and patroned travelers, thieves, and those who lived between rules. Where Hermes passed, divisions blurred and order bent. This was Olympus, not a council of purity or harmony, but a gathering of powers, flawed, radiant, immense. They argued as kin do. They favored and punished. They loved, betrayed, and interfered. They dispensed justice and indulged in rivalry. From their heights, they watched the world and shaped it according to impulse, memory, and will. The age of Titans had ended, but its shadow lingered. In its place rose an era of divine presence of gods who walked among mortals, of heroes born from their unions, of destinies altered by immortal hands. The world now had rulers. Yet stability remained elusive, and fate was far from finished. Long before cities rose or prayers were carved into stone, there were no humans upon the earth. The gods ruled alone. Their halls stood high above a world that was green, untamed, and silent. Beasts roamed freely. Mountains slept. Rivers ran without witness. But there were no hands to shape the land, no voices to name the stars, no fire to challenge the night. It was Prometheus who imagined something more. A titan of the older blood, he had never aligned himself with Cronus, nor was he counted among those condemned to Tartarus. During the Great War, he chose Zeus not from devotion, but from foresight. Prophecy lived within him, and he knew which throne would stand when the storm passed. His name reflected his nature, foresight. His brother, Epimetheus, embodied the opposite. Where one considered consequence, the other acted and repented. No two brothers could have been more unlike. Prometheus questioned authority. He examined justice. He stood between worlds, Titan and Olympian, past and future, a thinker in a cosmos ruled by passion and power. It was he who shaped mankind. Some say he molded them from river clay, his hands smoothing earth into form, breath awakening motion. Others claim he fashioned them in the likeness of the gods, upright, thoughtful, capable of invention. However it came to be, humanity entered the world fragile and unprepared. Their skin offered no protection. Their bodies bore no claws or fangs. They lacked speed, fur, and flame. Winter bit deeply. Beasts hunted freely. Darkness ruled the night. Prometheus looked upon them and felt pity. He ascended to Olympus and spoke on their behalf, asking that they be given a gift, something to allow them not to rule the world, but simply to endure it. Prometheus asked for more than survival. He asked for elevation. He believed that life, stripped to fear, alone, would never become worthy of the cosmos that birthed it. He sought something that could lift mortals beyond instinct, beyond mere endurance, something that could separate them from the animals that prowled the forests beside them. Zeus refused. The new king of the gods had only just secured his rule. The scars of rebellion were still fresh in the fabric of the world. He looked upon mortals not as promise, but as uncertainty. Another force, rising beneath the heavens, was not something he was prepared to risk. Let them live, he decreed, but let them tremble. Let them know the distance between flesh and immortality. Fire, Zeus declared, belonged to the gods alone. It burned in the hearth of Hestia. It blazed in the forge of Hephaestus. It lived in the lightning clenched within Zeus's own hand. Such power was not meant for mortal grasp. Prometheus did not accept this judgment. Quietly, without proclamation or challenge, he acted. He ascended to the heights of Olympus in secret and stole a living spark from the forge where divine flame was shaped. Concealing it within the hollow of a fennel stalk, he carried it down from the realm of the gods and placed it into human hands. For the first time, fire answered mortal breath. Flames danced beneath open skies. Smoke curled upward through the trees. Darkness recoiled. With fire came warmth against the cold, safety against beasts, cooked food, hardened tools, and the slow birth of craft and speech. Humanity began to gather, to build, to remember, and with creation came defiance. Zeus discovered the theft swiftly. His response was not immediate destruction, but something far more enduring. He chose punishment, disguised as generosity. At his command, the gods fashioned a gift for mankind. Hephaestus shaped the form from clay, flawless in proportion. Aphrodite bestowed allure and longing. Hermes gave her a clever tongue and a restless mind. Athena dressed her in shimmering garments and taught her the arts of grace. She was named Pandora. She carried with her a sealed vessel, later misunderstood as a box, within which lay the burdens of existence, illness, labor, grief, envy, madness, and death. Epimetheus, whose nature was always to act before thinking, welcomed her despite his brother's warnings. And when curiosity overcame restraint, the vessel was opened. The world changed. Suffering spread like smoke released from a confined fire. Hunger entered human lives. War followed. Age bent once straight backs. The brief innocence of humanity's earliest days vanished. Only one thing remained within the vessel, hope, fragile and flickering, left behind either by chance or by design. Prometheus's defiance was not forgotten. For his crime, Zeus ordered him bound at the edge of the world. Chained to a lonely peak, fastened with unbreakable bonds, the Titan endured a punishment crafted for immortals. Each day, an eagle descended and tore at his flesh. Each night, his body healed, restoring the torment anew. The cycle repeated without end, yet Prometheus did not repent. He endured centuries of pain because he carried knowledge Zeus feared. A truth bound to fate itself, that the king of the gods would one day be undone, not by force or rebellion, but by his own lineage. Zeus could not kill Prometheus without learning that secret, and so the Titan remained, broken but unyielding, as mortals below kindled fires and told stories of the one who had stolen light for them. The gods, despite their power, were not alone in shaping the world. Below Olympus, humanity struggled onward. Lives burned briefly against the long memory of immortals, yet they left marks no god could erase. Fields were tilled, songs were sung, wars were fought, love bloomed and withered. And while Zeus ruled the skies and Poseidon churned the seas, it was mortal hands that filled the earth with beauty and sorrow alike. Later ages would look back and see not one humanity, but many. The poet Hesiod, farmer and chronicler of human fate, was the first to name these divisions. He spoke of 5 ages through which mankind passed each, shaped by divine favor and punishment. Gold, silver, bronze, heroic, iron. Each age diminished from the last, save one. And in the beginning stood the golden age. It arose during the reign of Cronus, before fear had entered the heavens, before rebellion had hardened divine hearts, and before the earth had yet borne the full weight of suffering, before the world learned the weight of iron or the language of war, there was a time when mortality itself seemed almost divine. In that earliest age, humanity lived in a state of effortless harmony. Pain had not yet found them. Age did not bend their bodies. Labor was unknown. The earth gave freely, as if generosity were its natural law. Crops rose without seed being forced into soil, and seasons passed without hunger or fear. There were no rulers, because none were needed. No laws, because none were broken. No weapons, because no hand was raised in anger. Life unfolded gently, and when it ended, it did so without struggle. Death came like rest, not loss. Those who passed did not vanish, but lingered as unseen guardians, quiet spirits moving through the world, preserving balance, watching over justice. This was the closest humanity would ever come to perfection, a state later ages would remember only as myth. But nothing untouched by time remains unchanged. When Cronus fell and Zeus took the throne, the harmony of that first age faded. In its place arose the Silver Age, a world still beautiful, but already diminished. The mortals of this time were strong and long-lived, yet something essential had weakened within them. They remained children for generations, indulged and untested, slow to mature. When adulthood finally came, it brought arrogance instead of wisdom. These people did not honor the gods. They ignored divine order, refused offerings, and mocked sacred law. They lived without reverence, believing strength alone was enough. Zeus, seeing the warning his father had once feared take form, ended them. Their spirits were not elevated or preserved. They faded quietly into the underworld, leaving behind no legacy, no guardianship, only absence. Pride erased them, just as it would erase many after. From their silence emerged a harsher world. The Bronze Age followed, shaped by ash and fire. Its people were born from trees hardened into weapons, and war defined them from the beginning. Their bodies were said to be as unyielding as bronze, their homes and tools forged from the same metal. They did not farm for peace or build for beauty. They lived to fight. Their days were filled with the clash of arms, their nights with preparation for the next battle. They were not evil. They were relentless. Nothing gentle survived them. No songs endured. No cities stood long. When they finally destroyed one another, the earth absorbed their blood and moved on. Even the gods did not pause to mourn. They passed into Hades without ceremony, leaving behind only rusted weapons and scorched ground. Yet decline is not always a straight descent. From the ashes of that violent age rose something rare, a brief interruption in the fall. The heroic age burned brightly, though not for long. This was not a return to innocence, but a moment of greatness. These mortals were more than human, yet less than divine. Born of gods and men, they carried strength, courage, and ambition in equal measure. They founded cities, crossed seas, challenged monsters, and faced one another in wars that shaped legend itself. This was the time of Perseus and Heracles, of Theseus and Atalanta, of Jason and his companions, of Achilles, Hector, and Odysseus. Their lives were often short, their ends violent, but their names endured. Some were granted rest beyond the world's edge, in lands untouched by sorrow, where heroes lingered in eternal light. And then even that fire dimmed. What followed was the age Hesiod knew, the Iron Age, the one still unfolding, a world heavy with effort and loss. Here, life demands labor, from dawn until night. Fields resist the plow. Children grow amid conflict and scarcity. Trust fractures easily between friends, between kin, between host and guest. Justice no longer walks openly. Oaths are spoken lightly. Truth bends under desire. The gods, if they still watch, do so from a distance, silent and unreadable. In this age, humanity builds higher than ever before, yet remembers less. Forests fall, wealth is chased, power replaces wisdom. It is an age of endurance rather than harmony. Yet even here, something remains. People still build, still hope, still tell stories of a time when mortals lived like gods and the world was young and kind. And perhaps that fragile remembrance passed from voice to voice. Fire to fire is the final gift left to humanity. Zeus did not undo what had been released into the world. Once Pandora's vessel had been opened, suffering could not be recalled. The gods did not erase it, nor did they soften its edges. Instead, in the fading space between the age of gods and the age of men, something rare emerged, a generation unlike any other. These mortals were not shaped from earth alone. They carried the blood of Olympus within mortal flesh. Born of divine desire and human vulnerability, they stood between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. Their lives were short, often brutal, yet their names endured. They were the heroes, figures of brilliance and tragedy, whose deeds would echo long after their bones turned to dust. Among the earliest and greatest of them stood Perseus. His story did not begin with glory, but with fear. His mother, Danae, was a princess of Argos, daughter of King Acrisius, a ruler obsessed with control and haunted by prophecy. An oracle had spoken plainly. Danae would bear a son who would one day bring about her father's death. Such warnings cannot be bargained with, and kings, when frightened, rarely choose wisdom. Acrisius chose confinement. He sealed his daughter away beneath the earth in a chamber of bronze, locked against time, against men, against fate itself. But stone and metal mean little to the gods. Zeus entered the prison not with force, but as light itself, flowing through every crack and seam as a fall of golden rain. In solitude and silence, Danae conceived a child. When the king discovered the truth, terror overcame reason. Yet even he dared not stain his hands with the blood of his own kin. Instead, he placed Danae and her infant into a wooden chest and cast it into the sea, surrendering their fate to chance and tide. The sea did not claim them. Waves carried the chest across dark waters until it reached the island of Seriphos. There, a fisherman named Dictys drew it ashore. He asked no questions of gods or kings. He offered shelter. Perseus grew beneath his roof, strong of limb, sharp of eye, bearing within him a presence that marked him as more than mortal. Peace, however, never lingers around those shaped by destiny. The ruler of the island, King Polydectes, fixed his gaze upon Danae and desired her. Perseus, now a man, stood between them, refusing to yield. The king did not strike him openly. Pride forbade it. Instead, he chose deception. He announced a false wedding and demanded gifts from every man under his rule. Perseus, lacking wealth or horses, spoke boldly. He promised a gift greater than any other, the head of Medusa. Polydectes accepted at once, knowing the promise was a death sentence. Medusa was one of the three Gorgons winged, ancient. Their hair writhed with living serpents. Any who met their gaze were turned to stone. Only Medusa was mortal. None who sought her had returned. The gods took notice. Athena remembered. Medusa had once been a maiden in her temple, ruined by Poseidon's violence and punished for another's crime. She gave Perseus a shield polished to flawless clarity, a surface that reflected without distortion. With it, one could see without being seen. Hermes joined her aid. He placed a curved blade in Perseus's hand, light and deadly, and lent him winged sandals to cross earth and sky. He guided him to the Grey sisters who shared one eye and one tooth, guardians of forbidden paths. Perseus took their eye and withheld it, forcing knowledge from them. They spoke of the nymphs beyond the world's edge. From them, Perseus received what no mortal should wield, the helm of Hades, which swallowed the wearer in invisibility, a sacred sack to hold what could not be held, and the path to the place where night never lifted and stone remembered screams. Thus armed, Perseus flew beyond familiar lands, across desert and sea, to the furthest margins of the world. There, in a silent grove ringed with statues, men frozen mid-flight, mid-prayer, mid-terror, he found them. Medusa and her sisters slept among the shadows. Serpents coiled and hissing softly, wings folded like tattered cloaks. Perseus hovered above them, heart steady, eyes fixed not on flesh, but on reflection. He dared not look directly. He never looked upon her face. Guided by reflection alone, Perseus advanced in reverse, each movement measured, each breath held tight within his chest. Athena's shield became his sight, its polished surface revealing what his eyes dared not meet. When he stood above the sleeping Gorgon, he did not hesitate. One clean stroke ended Medusa's life, and from her death burst strange new beginnings. From the fallen body rose Pegasus, winged and untamed, leaping skyward as if freedom itself had been born. Beside him sprang Chrysaor, bearer of a golden blade, a warrior forged from blood and inevitability, both children of Poseidon, delivered into the world through violence and loss. The sisters awoke in fury. Their cries split the air, talons tore at shadow, but Perseus was already gone. Cloaked by the helm of darkness, he vanished from sight, leaving only silence and stone behind. The deed was complete, the head secured, its terrible power intact and undiminished. His return was long and winding, heavy with consequence. Along the way, he reached the shores of Ethiopia, where arrogance had drawn divine punishment. A sea beast ravaged the land, sent by a god affronted by mortal vanity. Andromeda, innocent and condemned, stood chained to stone, offered to the waves. Perseus did not weigh prophecy or cost. He acted. The monster fell, its form frozen into lifeless stone by Medusa's gaze, and Andromeda was freed. She became his wife, and through her, his bloodline would spread westward, woven into the future of kings. When Perseus returned to Seriphos, Polydectes laughed at his tale. The laughter ended quickly. The head was revealed. The court froze where it stood, king, courtiers, mockery and cruelty locked forever in stone. Dictys, the fisherman who had offered kindness without question, was raised in their place. For a moment, justice prevailed. Yet prophecy does not vanish when fulfilled in part. Perseus traveled to Argos, seeking reconciliation rather than vengeance. Acrisius fled, unwilling to face the grandson he had once condemned. But fate has no need of confrontation. At a distant festival, amidst celebration and sport, Perseus cast a discus. It veered. An old man fell. Acrisius died without knowing the hand that struck him belonged to the child he had tried to erase. The oracle was fulfilled without intent, without malice, without escape. Thus ended Perseus's tale. He stood larger than the world that bore him, balanced between God and man, strength and suffering, triumph and ruin. He was born of deception. Zeus, ever restless, desired Alcmene, wife of Amphitryon. Taking the form of her husband, he stretched a single night into three, bending time to his will. From that union came Heracles. From Amphitryon came a twin mortal, unremarkable, destined for obscurity. Hera watched. She saw the child not as a mistake, but as a threat. Even in infancy, Heracles carried power beyond measure. To end him early, she sent serpents into his cradle. The child did not cry. He seized them one in each hand and crushed them before fear could take root. His legend began there. As he grew, Heracles was trained in the arts of nobility, music, archery, combat, chariots, but discipline never fully contained him. Strength lived too close to the surface. There was a wildness in his spirit, something untamed. For a time, peace found him. He married Megara, daughter of King Creon, and built a life. Sons were born. The city stood secure beneath his protection, but the gods do not forget, and Hera's patience was long. Madness fell upon him like a veil. In a fit sent from Olympus, his mind shattered. When clarity returned, blood stained his halls. Wife and children lay dead by his own hands. The hero who had defeated beasts and monsters stood broken before the ruin he himself had wrought. His cries reached the heavens. No answer came from Olympus. The heavens remained silent. Crushed beneath the weight of his crime, Heracles sought judgment, not from gods, but from fate itself. He journeyed to Delphi, to the mouth of prophecy, where mortals knelt and kings trembled. There, the Pythia spoke not with clarity, but with riddles sharpened by inevitability. Redemption, she declared, would not come through exile or death, but through obedience. He must submit. Heracles was to serve Eurystheus, king of Tiryns, his cousin by blood, smaller in stature, lesser in strength, yet elevated by destiny. Only through humiliation, endurance, and suffering would the stain upon his soul be burned away. Thus began the labors. The first trial led him to Nemea, where a monstrous lion roamed, its hide impervious to blade or spear. Weapons failed. Strategy narrowed. In the darkness of the beast's cave, Heracles relied on what could not be broken his hands. He crushed the life from the creature with raw force and skinned it using its own claw. The pelt became his armor, a second skin that marked him forever. The second task drew him into poisoned marshland to face the Lernaean Hydra. Each severed head birthed two more, and venom seeped into the earth itself. With the aid of Iolaus, fire sealed each wound as it was cut. From the final head, deathless and lethal, Heracles claimed its blood, steeping his arrows in poison that would fell monsters and gods alike. The third labor demanded restraint rather than slaughter. The Ceryneian hind, sacred to Artemis, fled across hills and rivers for a year. Heracles pursued without haste, without harm, until at last he captured it alive. He returned it unharmed, earning the goddess's guarded respect. From patience, he was sent to fury. The Erymanthian boar was driven from mountain snows, wrestled into submission, and dragged back in chains. Eurystheus, watching from safety, cowered in terror, hiding himself from the sight of the living proof of Heracles' strength. The fifth task mocked heroism itself. The Augean stables, fouled beyond measure, were to be cleansed in a single day. Heracles did not labor with shovel or broom. He bent rivers to his will, letting water accomplish what strength need not. Next came the Stymphalian birds, creatures of bronze beak and razored wing. With Athena's aid, Heracles drove them into flight and brought them down from the sky, turning terror into silence. The seventh labor carried him across the sea to capture the Cretan bull divine, maddened and destructive. He wrestled the beast into submission and bore it back alive, its fury unbroken but contained. From there he traveled north to Thrace, where Diomedes' horses fed on human flesh. Heracles reversed the cruelty, feeding the tyrant to his own beasts. With their master gone, the mares grew tame. The ninth task demanded diplomacy. The girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, was offered willingly until Hera intervened. Suspicion ignited war. Hippolyta fell, and Heracles escaped with the prize, leaving peace shattered behind him. The 10th labor took him to the edge of the known world. There he confronted Geryon, triple-bodied and monstrous, guardian of red cattle. Heracles fought giant, hound, and herdsman alike, raised the pillars that would bear his name, and drove the cattle across continents. Yet Eurystheus denied completion. 2 labors, he claimed, were invalid. Assistance had been given. Rivers had been used. Redemption was delayed. The 11th trial led Heracles to the golden apples of the Hesperides. Guarded by a sleepless dragon, he bore the sky upon his shoulders while Atlas fetched the fruit, then reclaimed his freedom through cunning rather than force. The final labor demanded descent. Heracles entered the underworld alive. With no weapon but his strength, he confronted Cerberus, the hound of Hades. With the gods' permission, he subdued the beast and returned it to the world above. The cycle was complete. His redemption was earned, but peace did not follow. Heracles lived on fighting, wandering, loving, fathering sons, while Hera's hatred endured. In the end, it was neither monster nor blade that brought him low, but deceit. The centaur Nessus, dying, smeared his poisoned blood upon a garment and sent it to Heracles as a gift of trust. And so the greatest hero of the age walked unknowingly toward his final suffering. The venom was smeared upon a tunic given by his wife, Deianira, who believed with desperate hope that it was a charm of devotion, a safeguard against abandonment. She did not know that the blood she trusted carried the dying curse of Nessus. When Heracles donned the garment, the poison awoke. It burned through his flesh with slow, deliberate cruelty, gnawing at muscle and bone, turning the strength that had shattered monsters into a source of endless agony. No medicine could soothe it. No prayer reached Olympus. The gods who had so often tested him now remained silent. Knowing the pain would only deepen, Heracles chose his end with the same resolve that had guided his life. He climbed to a high and lonely mountain and built his own pyre, stacking the wood with steady hands despite the fire already consuming him from within. No mortal dared strike the flame until Philoctetes, a shepherd of no renown, stepped forward. For that single act of courage, Heracles entrusted him with the hero's bow and arrows, weapons steeped in Hydra's venom and destined to shape future wars. The fire was lit. The flames consumed his mortal body, but not his essence. Zeus lifted him from the smoke and pain to Olympus, granting him immortality and uniting him with Hebe, goddess of youth. Thus, Heracles was transformed, no longer merely a hero, but a god. His labors, born from madness, guilt, and penance, became the measure by which all heroism would be judged. Where other heroes lived on in stories, Heracles endured in shrines, in games of strength, and in the hearts of mortal men who dared to believe that suffering could be overcome and greatness earned. If Heracles was the greatest of Greek heroes, then Theseus was the most political, the most cunning, and the most human. He was not only a slayer of monsters or a breaker of curses, but a founder of order, a shaper of law, and the living spirit of Athens, the city that would one day call itself the cradle of civilization. His story stands at the crossroads of myth and memory, where heroic violence meets governance, and raw strength is tempered by reason. In Theseus lived the dual nature of a people who honored Athena with spear in one hand and olive branch in the other, believing that power and wisdom must stand together. Theseus was born of two fathers. One was Aegeus, king of Athens, mortal and aging. The other was Poseidon, god of the sea, vast and eternal. His mother, Aethra, lay with both on the same night, binding mortal blood and divine force within a single child. He was raised far from Athens, in the city of Trozen, unaware of the destiny coiled within him. Before leaving, Aegeus hid a sword and a pair of sandals beneath a massive stone, instructing Aethra that when the boy was strong enough to lift it, he would be ready to claim his lineage and his right to rule. Years passed, and Theseus grew tall and sharp-eyed, restless in body and mind. At 16, he heaved the stone aside with effort and laughter, took up the tokens of his father, and set his gaze toward Athens. Most would have chosen the safer road by sea, but Theseus deliberately chose the land route, long and perilous, haunted by bandits and killers. He believed that kingship could not be inherited without proof, that order must be earned by confronting chaos directly. Thus began the 6 labors of Theseus, not vast and cosmic like those of Heracles, but intimate and brutal, each rooted in the fears of ordinary travelers. He defeated Periphetes, the club-bearer, and took his weapon as a sign that violence would now serve justice. He slew Sinis, who murdered travelers by binding them to bent pine trees and tearing them apart. He cast Sciron from the cliffs into the sea, ending a reign of cruelty disguised as custom. He overcame Cercyon, the wrestler, by skill rather than brute force, proving that strength guided by intelligence prevails. Procrustes, who mutilated men to fit his iron bed, was destroyed by his own measure. Theseus did more than survive these encounters. He cleansed the roads, making the land safer with every step, laying the foundation for Athens to rise as a city of order rather than fear. When he reached Athens, Aegeus did not recognize his son. Medea, now queen, and still steeped in sorcery and suspicion, sensed the threat Theseus posed and urged the king to poison him. But when Theseus revealed the sword and sandals, the truth struck at once. Aegeus knocked the cup from his hand and embraced his son before the entire court. As always in myth, joy was fleeting. Trouble had long been brewing beyond the horizon. Athens had suffered years of humiliation after defeat by the island of Crete. As punishment, King Minos demanded a terrible tribute. 7 young men and 7 maidens sent every 9 years to be devoured by the Minotaur. The creature, half man and half bull, was born of Minos' pride. When Poseidon sent a sacred bull from the sea to be sacrificed, Minos kept it instead. The gods answered with a curse, driving his wife Pasiphae to desire the beast. From that unnatural union came Asterion, horned, violent, and monstrous, a living shame confined within a labyrinth beneath the palace of Knossos, designed by Daedalus, the greatest inventor of his age. When Theseus learned of the tribute, he did not hesitate. He offered himself among the chosen, setting sail not as a sacrifice awaiting death, but as a hunter preparing to face the heart of the maze, into the lair. Before his departure, Theseus stood before his father and made a vow that would later haunt all of Athens. If he returned victorious, his ship would bear white sails, a sign of life and triumph. If he failed, the sails would remain black, a signal of death carried on the wind. Thus, bound by promise and omen, he set sail for Crete. Upon his arrival, fate shifted once more. Ariadne, daughter of King Minos and half-sister to the Minotaur, saw Theseus among the condemned youths and was undone by love. Whether stirred by pity, defiance, or desire, she chose him over blood and throne. In secret, she gave him what no blade could replace, a ball of thread, a clue to unwind the labyrinth's madness and the knowledge of its turning paths. When night fell, Theseus entered the maze alone. Within its coiling corridors, stone gave way only to more stone. Sound died quickly, and direction lost all meaning. There, in the heart of darkness, he met the Minotaur. No words were spoken. It was a contest of will and terror, a prince against a living curse. With skill honed on the roads of Attica and a blade guided by resolve, Theseus struck the beast down. Then, guided by the thread, he retraced his steps and emerged once more into light. He fled Crete with Ariadne and the freed Athenians, cutting through the Aegean night toward home. Yet love in Greek myth is never simple, nor is victory ever complete. On the island of Naxos, Ariadne was left behind. Some say Dionysus claimed her, revealing himself in splendor and wine-dark divinity. Others whisper that Theseus abandoned her out of fear, knowing that a Cretan queen might weaken his claim in Athens. She awoke alone beneath unfamiliar stars, her fate torn from the man she had saved. Theseus sailed on, burdened by loss, and in his grief or forgetfulness, he failed to change the sails. From the cliffs of Athens, King Aegeus saw black cloth on the horizon and believed his son dead. Overcome with sorrow, he cast himself into the sea, which from that day bore his name, the Aegean. Thus Theseus returned victorious and crowned, yet already marked by unintended ruin. As king, Theseus did not rest. He bound Attica into a single polity, uniting villages and tribes into one city-state. He established festivals, courts, and sacred rites, shaping Athens not merely as a seat of power, but as a shared identity. His heroism lay as much in law as in combat. Still, the pull of myth did not release him. He rode beside Heracles against the Amazons, and later, driven by pride and reckless friendship, descended into the underworld with Pirithous to steal Persephone herself from Hades. The attempt failed. Pirithous was consumed by the earth, and Theseus was bound to the chair of forgetfulness, his strength draining, his memory fading in the air of death. Only Heracles, passing through on his own grim errand, tore him free. Time, however, spares no ruler. In later years, the Athenians, restless and drawn toward new heroes and new ideas, turned against him. Theseus was driven into exile and fled to Skyros, where a jealous king betrayed him and cast him from a cliff. He died without crown or court, alone upon foreign stone. Long after, his bones were brought back to Athens and honored, but at the moment of his death, there was no chorus to mark his passing. Yet his legacy endured. Where Heracles embodied the strength of the body, Theseus represented the strength of the polis, the city bound by law, memory, and shared fate. Athens would rise upon the framework he built, and though it worshipped Athena, it never forgot the king who gave it form. Long before Troy burned and long after the Titans had fallen, another voyage would reshape the world. A quest that spanned seas and kingdoms, bound heroes into fragile brotherhood, and ended in betrayal, exile, and sorrow. This was the tale of Jason, a prince forged not by prophecy alone, but by patience and loss. His story began in Iolcus, a coastal kingdom of Thessaly, where his father's throne had been seized by his own brother, Peleus, a man who revered power above all law. Warned by omens that the child would one day return to claim what was stolen, Peleus sought Jason's death. But the infant was smuggled away, and raised in secret by the centaur Chiron, teacher of heroes, who had shaped Achilles and Asclepius before him. Jason grew among forests and stone, hardened by the hunt and tempered by songs of fallen kings and rightful heirs. When he returned at last, he came as a man wearing only one sandal, lost while crossing the river Anaros as he carried an old woman upon his back. The woman, unseen in her truth, was Hera herself, testing the young hero. When Peleus beheld the one-sandaled stranger, his blood ran cold, for the oracle had warned him long ago to fear such a man. Jason did not raise his sword. He spoke his claim plainly, naming himself the son of Aeson and heir to the throne. Peleus, cunning and cautious, did not deny him outright, but chose instead a test that he believed no man could survive. Unable to strike openly, Peleus hid his fear behind courtesy and ceremony, feigning welcome while laying a trap with measured words. "If you wish to be king," he said calmly, "then prove yourself worthy. Journey to the far land of Colchis and bring back the golden fleece. And only then will I yield the crown." It was not an arbitrary demand, but one drawn from old and terrible legend. Long before, a miraculous ram with a fleece of living gold had carried Phrixus across the sea, saving him from death. When Phrixus reached safety in Colchis, he sacrificed the beast in gratitude, and its fleece, radiant as fire, was nailed to an ancient oak in a sacred grove. There it hung, guarded by shadow and serpent, watched by King Aeetes, son of Helios, the sun god. No Greek had ever reached that land and returned. Peleus expected Jason to vanish into myth and never come home. Jason accepted the challenge without protest. He did not gather soldiers, but heroes. Men came not by command, but by desire for glory and fate. Heracles answered the call, restless and immense, and Orpheus came bearing his lyre, whose music could bend stone and sorrow alike. Atalanta the huntress joined them, swift and unyielding, as did Castor and Polydeuces, sons of Zeus, Meleager, Theseus, and Zetes, and Calais, the winged sons of the north wind, until nearly 50 heroes stood together. For them was built a ship unlike any other, the Argo, crafted by Argus under the watchful guidance of Athena herself. Into its prow she set a beam of sacred oak from Dodona, a living timber that could speak in prophecy. The ship was more than wood and sail. It was a voice in the journey, whispering warnings and guiding fate as they sailed eastward beyond familiar shores and into legend. Their first trials were not monsters, but men and desire. On Lemnos, they found an island ruled entirely by women who had slain their husbands in vengeance. There Jason lay with Hypsipyle, queen of the isle, and fathered sons he would never see grown, while time slipped quietly past them. In Thrace, they encountered Phineus, a blind seer, tormented by harpies that fouled his food before he could eat. When the Boreads drove the winged creatures away, Phineus repaid the Argonauts with prophecy, revealing the only path through the Symplegades, the clashing rocks, two massive cliffs that slammed shut like jaws upon any ship that dared to pass. At his counsel, they released a dove. It flew through, losing only a single feather. The Argo followed at full speed, the rocks crushing her stern but sparing her life. And from that moment the passage stood still, as though the sea itself had bowed to their courage. At last they reached Colchis, a land of fire, iron, and ancient law. Aeetes did not slaughter them on sight, for in that old world strangers were sacred, but neither did he surrender the fleece. Instead, Jason was given 3 impossible tasks: to yoke fire-breathing bulls, to plow a field with them, to sow it with dragon's teeth, and then to defeat the warriors who would rise from the soil itself. These were not trials of bravery, but of inevitability. It would have ended there, had the gods not intervened once more. At Hera's urging, Eros struck Medea, daughter of Aeetes, with an arrow of love. She was a priestess of Hecate, learned in herbs and poison, untouched by men, cold and disciplined as moonlight. Yet at the sight of Jason, her heart betrayed her. She gave him a potion to shield his flesh from flame, taught him to cast a stone among the earthborn warriors so they would turn upon one another, and finally led him to the fleece itself, guarded by a serpent that never slept. Medea sang ancient spells, her voice weaving sleep into the beast's coils, and it sank into slumber. Jason seized the fleece, brilliant and warm as molten gold, and fled with Medea into the dark. Aeetes pursued them with ships, but Medea bought time with blood. She took her young brother Apsyrtus, cut him into pieces, and scattered them into the sea, forcing her father to halt and gather the remains for burial. Thus, the Argo escaped, stained forever by magic and crime. Their return was long and cursed, past Scylla and Charybdis, through wandering seas and hostile lands, until at last they reached Iolcus. Peleus still refused to yield the crown. Medea answered with vengeance, deceiving his daughters into cutting him apart and boiling him alive under the promise of rebirth. Horror swept the city. Jason, now bound to treachery and sorcery, was driven into exile. He fled to Corinth with Medea, where they lived for years in uneasy peace, until Jason, still craving legitimacy, cast her aside to marry a Corinthian princess. Medea's fury was final and merciless. She sent a poisoned gown that burned the bride to ash, murdered her own sons by Jason, and fled in a chariot drawn by dragons, a gift of her dark and divine lineage, leaving Jason alone amid ruin, regret, and the silence of broken oaths. Grandfather, Helios. Jason, broken in spirit and stripped of every crown he had sought, returned at last to Iolcus, not as a king, but as a shadow of the man who had once led heroes across the sea. In his final years, he wandered among ruins and empty harbors, forgotten by the people he had hoped to rule. One day, as he rested beneath the Argo, now dry-docked, rotting, and stripped of her former glory, a weathered beam loosened and fell, striking his skull. Thus ended the life of Jason, not in battle, not in triumph, but in silence, crushed beneath the remains of his own legend. Yet the story endured, for in the quest for the Golden Fleece, in the gathering of heroes, in love betrayed and ambition undone, Greece found one of its most enduring myths, a warning etched into memory that greatness, when driven by desire alone, often devours itself. There are few bloodlines in Greek myth more haunted than the royal house of Thebes. Where other heroes faced beasts or foreign kings, the Theban rulers fought their own blood and wrestled endlessly with fate itself. Their legacy was not carved in monuments or sung in victory, but written in madness, riddles, and murder. Even the city's founding was steeped in omen and unrest. The story began with Cadmus, a Phoenician prince and brother to Europa, who set out to find his sister after Zeus carried her away in the form of a white bull. When his search failed, Cadmus sought guidance from the oracle at Delphi. The god's command was strange but final. Abandon the search, follow a cow until it lies down, and there found a city. Cadmus obeyed, wandering until the animal collapsed upon a lonely hill. When Cadmus sent his companions to fetch water from a nearby spring, they were slaughtered by a great serpent sacred to Ares, guarding the source. Cadmus slew the beast himself, and at Athena's instruction, sowed its teeth into the soil. From the earth sprang armed warriors, the Spartoi, born fully formed and ready for war. They turned on one another until only 5 survived. These 5 became the noble families of Thebes, and Cadmus their king. Cadmus served the war god for 8 years in penance, and when his debt was paid, he married Harmonia, daughter of Ares and Aphrodite. Even the gods attended their wedding, gifting the couple a necklace of unmatched beauty, forged by Hephaestus. It was a gift cursed from its making, and it would bring ruin to all who wore it. Thus the doom of Thebes began not in hatred, but in celebration, sealed by beauty and blood. Generations passed, and tragedy followed Cadmus's line like a shadow. His daughters met cruel fates. Ino was driven mad and cast her child into the sea. Actaeon, son of Autonoe, was torn apart by his own hounds after glimpsing Artemis bathing. Semele, beloved of Zeus, was deceived by Hera into demanding to see her lover's true form and was consumed by divine fire. Agave, driven into Dionysian frenzy, tore her own son Pentheus limb from limb, believing him a lion. But the greatest tragedy was yet to come, carried by Cadmus's distant descendant, Laius. Laius became king of Thebes and took Jocasta as his queen. But the gods had not forgotten the sins of Cadmus's bloodline. An oracle warned that if Laius ever had a son, that child would kill his father and marry his mother. As in all Greek stories, the warning did not prevent the deed. Laius lay with Jocasta, and a son was born. Terrified, Laius ordered the infant's ankles pierced and bound, then commanded a servant to abandon the child on Mount Cithaeron. The servant could not bring himself to kill the infant, and instead passed him to a shepherd, who delivered the child to the king and queen of Corinth, Polybus and Merope. They were childless, and welcomed the boy as their own, naming him Oedipus, the swollen-footed, and never telling him the truth of his birth. Oedipus grew into a clever, confident young man, but whispers about his origins reached him. Seeking truth, he traveled to Delphi, where the oracle delivered the same terrible prophecy once given to Laius. He would kill his father and marry his mother. Horrified, believing Polybus and Merope to be his true parents, Oedipus fled Corinth, unknowingly running straight toward his fate. At a crossroads near Delphi, he encountered an older man, proud and imperious, riding in a chariot. A dispute over the rite of passage turned violent, and in a moment of rage, Oedipus slew the stranger and his attendants. He did not know that the man he had killed was his true father, Laius, king of Thebes. Oedipus continued onward, unaware that prophecy had already begun to close its jaws, and arrived at Thebes, a city paralyzed not by war, but by terror. For Thebes was plagued by the Sphinx, a creature of woman and lion, sent as divine punishment, who devoured all who failed to answer her riddle. The fate of Thebes, and of Oedipus himself, now waited upon a single question. A creature with the body of a lion, the wings of an eagle, and the face of a woman. She devoured all who failed to answer her riddle, feeding not on flesh alone, but on despair. Her question echoed across the road to Thebes like a curse carved into stone. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon and 3 in the evening? Oedipus answered without pause. Man, at dawn he crawls, at midday he walks upright, and in the evening of life he leans upon a staff. Defeated not by force but by understanding, the Sphinx shrieked and hurled herself from the cliffs. Thebes rejoiced. The stranger who had freed them was crowned king, and in gratitude he was given the widowed queen as his bride, Jocasta, his mother. Years passed in uneasy peace. Oedipus ruled wisely and fathered 4 children, Eteocles and Polynices, Antigone and Ismene. Yet the gods do not forget blood spilled without justice. A plague fell upon Thebes, rotting crops and choking the streets with death. The oracle declared the land cursed by unpunished murder. Slowly, piece by dreadful piece, the truth surfaced. The old man at the crossroads, the scarred ankles, the trembling servant who had spared a child, and Tiresias, the blind prophet who saw more clearly than any living man, naming the king as both son and husband, father and brother. Jocasta hanged herself in her chamber. Oedipus, in horror and clarity, tore the golden brooches from her gown and drove them into his own eyes, blinding himself so he would never again look upon the world he had unknowingly defiled. He begged for exile and wandered the land, led only by Antigone's steady hand. Near Colonus he found sanctuary, and there the earth itself swallowed him, his grave hidden by the gods. But the curse did not die with him. His sons turned on one another. Eteocles and Polynices fought for the throne, and when Polynices was cast out, he raised an army from Argos and led the seven against Thebes. Brother met brother at the gates, and both fell by each other's hand. The city survived, but its soul was shattered. Antigone, last bearer of the old honor, defied the king's decree and buried her brother. For this, her uncle Creon condemned her to be sealed alive in stone. The gods answered with madness and death upon his house. Thebes endured, but its kingship became a cycle of ruin. The tale of Oedipus is not one of monsters slain or cities founded, but of fate itself, of how a man may flee prophecy with every step and still run straight into its grasp. It is a tragedy born not of evil, but of ignorance, of a man who sought truth and was destroyed by it. The house of Thebes was built upon serpents' teeth and riddles, and no answer, however clever, can overturn the will of the gods. Of all the wars that ever scarred mortal soil, none would echo louder than the one fought for a woman's face. A war of oaths and pride, of beauty and betrayal, of gods and kings, and the fall of empires. It began not with spears or fire, but with a wedding. All the gods were invited to the marriage of Peleus and Thetis, the sea nymph destined to bear a son greater than his father, all save one. Eris, goddess of discord, was denied entry. In her fury, she cast into the feast a golden apple, inscribed with words that would fracture the world, to the fairest. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite each claimed it. Unable to judge themselves, they placed the choice in mortal hands. Paris, a shepherd prince, son of King Priam of Troy, exiled in infancy after an omen foretold he would one day bring ruin to his city. On Mount Ida, the goddesses came before him. Hera promised dominion over kings. Athena offered wisdom and victory in war. Aphrodite, smiling with the calm of inevitability, promised him the love of the most beautiful woman alive. Paris chose love, and in doing so marked Helen of Sparta, daughter of Zeus, wife of Menelaus. Helen had drawn suitors from across Achaia, and her mortal father Tyndareus, fearing the war her hand would spark, bound them all with a sacred oath. Whoever won her, the rest would defend that marriage and punish any who violated it. The oath was sworn in laughter, but oaths, once sealed, bind fate itself. Menelaus claimed Helen and ruled Sparta justly beside her. But when Paris arrived as a guest under sacred law, hospitality was betrayed. He carried Helen away across the sea, and with her went the peace of the world. The oath was called in. Kings gathered. Ships were built, and the road to Troy, long and red, was opened, fated to die young and be remembered forever. Achilles was the sharpest blade the Greeks possessed. But even the sharpest blade can cut its own hand. The war that would decide the fate of Troy did not ignite with the clash of armies, but with an insult, small in form, yet vast in consequence. Agamemnon, needing compensation for a captive taken from him, seized Briseis, a woman claimed by Achilles as his war prize. In doing so, he did not merely take a woman, he took honor, and in the world of heroes, honor was breath itself. Achilles withdrew from battle, his rage turning inward, heavy and corrosive. He swore by his mother Thetis, and by the dark waters of the Styx, that he would not lift his spear again for Agamemnon. And the gods listened. Without Achilles, the tide turned. Hector, prince of Troy, son of Priam, stepped forward as the city's shield. He was everything Achilles was not: a husband, a father, a man who fought not for glory, but for duty. Beneath Troy's walls, Hector drove the Greeks back again and again, burning ships, breaking lines, standing unbroken beneath the sun. His armor shone, his voice carried, and for a time, it seemed Troy might endure. Patroclus, Achilles' companion, the closest thing he had to a brother, could no longer bear the slaughter. He begged Achilles to let him wear the great armor, to give the Trojans the illusion that Achilles had returned. Reluctantly, Achilles agreed, but warned him not to press too far. Patroclus drove the Trojans back in terror, but pride and momentum carried him beyond the walls. There, Apollo struck him from behind. Euphorbus wounded him, and Hector delivered the final blow. When news reached Achilles, the earth itself seemed to shudder. His grief was raw, immediate, and absolute. Rage consumed him, hotter than any fire Hephaestus had ever forged. He reconciled with Agamemnon, not out of forgiveness, but necessity. New armor was made for him, a shield depicting the whole world. Cities at peace and war, fields and stars, life and death bound together in bronze. Achilles returned to battle like a force of nature unleashed. He slaughtered Trojans by the score, drove the river Scamander into fury, and at last met Hector beneath the Scaean gate. Hector ran once, twice, 3 times around the city, until Athena tricked him into standing. They fought, and Achilles' spear found its mark. Hector fell, knowing his fate, begging only that his body be returned to his family. Achilles refused. He dragged Hector's corpse behind his chariot, day after day, until even the gods recoiled. Only Priam's courage broke the cycle. Guided by Hermes, the old king came alone into the Greek camp, knelt before Achilles, and kissed the hands that had killed his son. He spoke not as a king, but as a father. And Achilles wept. He returned Hector's body, and for a brief moment, war paused. But fate had not finished its work. Paris, guided by Apollo, loosed an arrow that struck Achilles in the heel, the one place where mortality still lived. The greatest of Greek heroes fell, not in conquest, but fulfillment. His armor was claimed by Odysseus through cunning, driving Ajax the Greater into madness and suicide. One by one, the heroes vanished. The war dragged toward its end. It was Odysseus who conceived the final deception. A great wooden horse, hollowed and filled with warriors, left upon the shore as a false offering. The Greeks sailed away, hiding behind the island of Tenedos. The Trojans argued. Laocoon warned them to fear Greeks bearing gifts. Cassandra screamed prophecy. No one believed. But pride and exhaustion won. The horse was dragged inside the walls. That night, while Troy slept, the warriors emerged. The gates were opened. Fire bloomed. Troy burned. Priam was slaughtered at his own altar. Astyanax was thrown from the walls. Andromache was led away in chains. Cassandra was taken. Aeneas fled with his father and son, carrying Troy's future on his back. Helen was reunited with Menelaus, spared by beauty and memory. The city that had stood for generations fell in a single night. Thus ended the Trojan War, not with honor restored, but with ashes and lamentation. The victors would not find peace. Storms awaited them. Curses followed them home. Agamemnon would die by his wife's hand. Ajax the Lesser would drown. Odysseus would wander for 10 years more before seeing Ithaca again. The gods had had their war. Mortals paid the cost. And in the songs that followed, Greece remembered not victory, but loss. For the Trojan War was never truly about Helen, nor even Troy. It was about the limits of pride, the weight of oaths, and the truth that when gods and men collide, the earth itself remembers. Determined to make that death matter, the quarrel between these two would shatter the fragile Greek alliance. It began, as so many quarrels do, over a woman. In one of the many raids that marked the long siege, the Greeks took captives from the surrounding lands. Among them were Chryses, daughter of a priest of Apollo, and Brises, a princess of Lyrnessus. Chryses was awarded to Agamemnon, Brises to Achilles. When Chryses' father came to the Greek camp to ransom his daughter, bearing gold, garlands, and reverent words, Agamemnon scorned him publicly and drove him away in shame. The old man prayed to Apollo, and the god answered not with thunder or flame, but with plague, a silent killer that crept through the camp, striking beasts and men alike, filling the air with death. At last, the seer Calchas spoke the truth. Apollo would not relent until Chryses was returned. Forced to choose between pride and survival, Agamemnon gave her up, but his resentment burned. As compensation, he demanded Brises from Achilles. It was a humiliation Achilles could not endure. He rose from the council in fury, called Agamemnon a greedy coward, and swore a sacred oath before the gods. He would no longer fight for the Greeks, let them bleed without him. And so he withdrew to his tent, and with him withdrew the Myrmidons, his elite warriors, silent and deadly, forged for war. From that moment, the balance shifted. Without Achilles, the Greeks began to falter. The Trojans pressed harder. Hector, son of Priam and champion of Troy, led them forward with a quiet, noble fury. He was not Paris, whose desire had sparked the war, nor Deiphobus, who sought glory. Hector was the heart of the city, a husband, a father, a prince, who carried the weight of his people, not in pride, but in duty. Day by day, the Trojans drove the Greeks back toward the sea. Ships burned. Heroes fell. Protesilaus, the first Greek to leap ashore, had died at the war's beginning. Now Patroclus, closest companion of Achilles, watched the losses mount with growing despair. Some called him a friend, others something more, but all knew he alone could reach Achilles through grief and rage. When the Trojans broke through the Greek defenses and threatened to burn the fleet, Patroclus begged Achilles to let him fight in his stead. Reluctantly, Achilles agreed. Patroclus donned the hero's armor, mounted his chariot, and led the Myrmidons into battle. For a time, the Trojans faltered, believing Achilles had returned. But Patroclus, carried away by borrowed glory, pressed too far. Near the gates of Troy, he met Hector. Their duel was swift and brutal, and it ended with Patroclus falling beneath Hector's spear. With him fell whatever restraint remained in Achilles' heart. When Achilles learned of his death, his grief shook the camp. He did not weep like a man. He howled like a force of nature, a storm made flesh. His mother, Thetis, rose from the sea and brought him new armor forged by Hephaestus himself, bronze that gleamed like the sun, a shield carved with the whole world, cities at peace and war, life and death bound together. Then Achilles returned to battle. No one could stand against him. He slaughtered Trojans by the dozen, overturned chariots, stained the riverbanks with blood. He chased Hector around the walls of Troy 3 times before they met in single combat. Hector fought with courage, but Achilles was a fire no valor could extinguish. He struck Hector down, and in rage beyond reason, dragged his body behind his chariot day after day, denying the fallen prince burial. It was Priam, old king of Troy, who ended that madness. Guided by Hermes, he came alone into the Greek camp by night, knelt before Achilles, and kissed the hands that had killed his son. He spoke not as a king, but as a father, and Achilles wept. He returned Hector's body and granted Priam safe passage. For a brief moment, the war fell silent. But peace never lingers long. Achilles would not survive the war. A poisoned arrow, fired by Paris or guided by Apollo, struck his heel, the one place where mortality still lived. He died young, undefeated, and unmatched. The Iliad ends not with Troy's fall, but with a funeral and shared grief. Yet the war itself was not over. The wooden horse had not yet been built. The gates had not yet been opened, but the blood had already been paid. Winding road of loss and cunning that would become the final great song of the Age of Heroes. Odysseus did not sail straight home from the smoking ruins of Troy. No hero did. The gods, angered by sacrilege and swollen with old grudges, scattered the Greek fleet across the wine-dark sea like leaves before a storm. For Odysseus, king of Ithaca, the war did not end with victory, but only changed its shape. His struggle would no longer be fought with spear and shield, but with wit, endurance, and the slow erosion of hope. Driven first to the land of the Cicones, his men sacked the city in greed and paid for it in blood when the locals rallied and struck back. Then they reached the shore of the Lotus Eaters, where the fruit of forgetfulness erased all longing for home. Odysseus dragged his men back to the ships by force, knowing that a hero who forgets his purpose is already lost. From there they came to the cave of the Cyclops Polyphemus, son of Poseidon, a brute of immense strength and simple cruelty. Trapped within the cave, Odysseus named himself Nobody and blinded the monster with a burning stake. When Polyphemus cried out, saying that nobody had harmed him, no help came, but Odysseus's pride betrayed him. As he sailed away, he shouted his true name, and Polyphemus called upon his father to curse the man who had wounded him. From that moment, the sea itself became Odysseus's enemy. Aeolus, keeper of the winds, gifted him a leather bag containing every storm, leaving only a gentle breeze to guide him home. But as Ithaca came into sight, Odysseus's crew, suspecting treasure, opened the bag. The winds howled free and hurled them back across the sea. At the land of the Laestrygonians, giants crushed ships like toys and devoured sailors by the dozen. Only Odysseus's ship escaped. Broken and bleeding, they reached the island of Circe, the sorceress who turned men into swine. Odysseus, aided by Hermes, resisted her magic and forced her submission. For a year they stayed, feasting and forgetting, until memory stirred again. It was Circe who told him the truth. He could not reach home until he descended into the underworld and spoke with the dead. In the realm of Hades, Odysseus met the shades of fallen heroes. Achilles, who told him that glory was nothing beside life. Agamemnon, who warned him of treachery waiting at home. And Tiresias, who foretold the rest of his path. He would lose all his men. He would return alone, in disguise, and reclaim his house through blood. From there came the sirens, whose song promised knowledge and doom. Odysseus, bound to the mast, listened and wept, while his crew rowed on with ears stopped by wax. Then Scylla and Charybdis, one a many-headed horror, snatching sailors from the deck, the other a living whirlpool that swallowed the sea. He chose Scylla, knowing sacrifice was sometimes the only wisdom left. On the island of the sun god Helios, his men slaughtered the sacred cattle despite his warnings. Zeus answered with a storm that shattered the ship and drowned every soul but Odysseus. Cast alone upon the sea, he drifted to the island of Calypso, who loved him and offered immortality if he would stay. For 7 years he lived there, ageless and empty, until the gods themselves grew weary of his suffering. Released at last, he reached the land of the Phaeacians, where he told his story and was carried home at last while he slept. Odysseus returned to Ithaca as a beggar. His house was overrun with suitors who feasted on his wealth and pressed his wife Penelope to choose a new husband. Penelope, faithful and cunning, delayed them with weaving and unweaving, holding the kingdom together with patience alone. Odysseus revealed himself only at the right moment. With his son Telemachus and a handful of loyal men, he slaughtered the suitors in his hall and reclaimed his throne. Thus ended his war, not with conquest, but with restoration. With Odysseus's return, the long shadow of Troy finally lifted. The age of heroes faded into memory. The gods withdrew their hands. The world turned toward quieter struggles, toward cities, laws, and the slow passing of generations. What remained were stories, carried in song and firelight, of men who stood between gods and dust, who burned brightly and briefly, and whose lives, shaped by fate and choice alike, became the foundation of all that followed. He had faced witches who stripped men of their names and turned them into swine, and he had endured the long captivity of Calypso, the sea nymph who desired him not as a hero, but as a possession, keeping him as her lover through 7 slow, aching years while time itself seemed to rot around him. He had walked to the very edge of the underworld, poured blood into the earth, and spoken with the dead, hearing truths no living man was meant to hear. He had listened to the song of the sirens, not with wonder, but bound to the mast in pain and restraint, while his crew, deafened by wax, rowed on in terror. He sailed the narrow throat of the world between Scylla and Charybdis, where stone and sea conspired to devour men whole. And there he lost what little remained of his companions, not to monsters alone, but to pride, hunger, and human folly. At last, broken and emptied, he washed ashore alone on the distant island of the Fiats. They listened to his story, not with awe, but with pity, moved by his suffering rather than his glory. They gave him what he had not known for years, a ship, a wind that obeyed, and safe passage home. When he finally returned to Ithaca, he came not as a king, but as a shadow, clothed in rags, silent, unrecognized, his beard uncut, his eyes hardened by loss. In his absence, his house had been consumed. Suitors filled his halls, feasting on his wealth, mocking his name, and plotting to claim his wife, Penelope, who endured them all in quiet defiance, weaving and unweaving the same shroud by candlelight, turning patience into resistance. With the help of his son Telemachus, whom he scarcely knew, his loyal swineherd, and the bow that no other man could string, Odysseus reclaimed his home the only way left to him. One by one, he slew the suitors. There was no mercy, no celebration. Blood filled the great hall, and the floor remembered every step. Peace returned to Ithaca, but it was thin, fragile, and temporary. The cycle of war and vengeance never truly ends. It only waits. Many others fared worse. Ajax the Lesser, arrogant and cruel, was struck down by Athena herself for his crimes. Diomedes, brave and loyal in war, returned to find betrayal in his bed and hatred in his city. Cast out, he wandered west, founding cities that would fade into half-remembered legend. Vilites, who had slain Paris with the bow of Heracles, found no welcome at home and became a man without a place. Neoemus, the son of Achilles, was cut down at Delphi, killed at Apollo's own altar, perhaps as payment for the blood he spilled beneath the walls of Troy. The war had promised glory. It delivered only ashes. The heroes who once stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the towers of Ilium returned not to songs of triumph, but to broken homes, bitter wives, hostile gods, and the hollow echo of stories that no longer matched the truth. In the end, there were no victors, only survivors. Yet before the walls of Troy ever rose, before shields were lifted or ships touched the wine-dark sea, there flowed a deeper current of power, older than man, older even than war, the rule of the gods. Their presence was often whispered beneath mortal tales. But it was the Olympians who wove the very fabric of fate itself, and even they were not the first to rule. Before Olympus, there was chaos, and from chaos came Gaia, Uranus, Cronus, and the slow, violent birth of divine order. The age of the Titans ended in fire and thunder when Zeus, the youngest child of Cronus, rose against his father, freed his swallowed siblings from the belly of the sky god, and cast the Titans into the black pit of Tartarus. In their place rose the Olympians, 12 in number, though their thrones and names shifted with time. Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Theta, Hestia, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Aphrodite, Hystas, and Hermes. Upon Mount Olympus they built a new order, not gentler than the one before, but shrewder, more intricate, and far more entangled with the lives of mortals. Zeus ruled from his golden throne, thunderbolt always within reach, his voice law among gods and men. Yet his power was not forged by strength alone. He ruled through alliances, rewards, and punishments, dividing the world between his brothers, sky for himself, sea for Poseidon, underworld for Hades, while Earth and Olympus remained a tense, shared ground. Around him, the pantheon took shape. Hera, sister and queen, presided over marriage and birth, her days marked by fury and vigilance, for Zeus was never faithful. His unions with goddesses, nymphs, and mortal women filled the world with children who would shape history. Heracles, Perseus, Helen, Minos. Hera answered each betrayal with cold, enduring wrath. Beside them stood Athena, born not of womb but of mind, sprung fully armored from Zeus's skull. Goddess of wisdom and warcraft, she favored cleverness over brute force, guiding Odysseus and shaping cities like Athens through law and reason. Unlike Ares, who reveled in slaughter, Athena's war was disciplined, measured, and purposeful. Her presence marked the Olympian age as one ruled not only by strength, but by intellect as well. Strength. Apollo and Artemis, twin children of Leto, carried light and shadow in equal measure, two forces born together, yet forever pulling in different directions. Apollo, radiant and golden-haired, stood as god of prophecy, music, and healing. His presence brought harmony, order, and vision, but never certainty. He claimed the oracle at Delphi, where he spoke through the Pythia in broken phrases and riddles, shaping the rise and fall of kings with words that revealed just enough to destroy those who misunderstood them. Armies marched, and cities burned because of his prophecies. Yet the god of healing was also the bearer of disease. At Troy, his arrows carried plague, reminding mortals that the same hand that soothes can also condemn. Artemis, his sister, belonged to no city, and bowed to no man. She roamed the deep forests and high mountains, untouched, unseen, a huntress sworn to her own freedom. She guarded wild creatures and sacred groves with equal ferocity. Those who crossed her boundaries did not receive warnings. They received punishment. Artemis did not negotiate, and she did not forgive. Her silence was often deadlier than Apollo's words. Data, goddess of the harvest, sustained the fragile balance between life and survival. As long as she smiled, the earth remained fertile. But when her daughter, Persephone, was taken by Hades into the underworld, that balance shattered. Grief hardened her heart. Fields dried, crops failed, hunger spread across the world. From her sorrow came the seasons themselves, a cycle of loss and renewal written into the soil. Every winter echoed her mourning. Every spring marked her brief reunion. Her myth lived not in temples alone, but in every seed buried and reborn. Aphrodite, said by some to have risen from the sea foam where the severed flesh of Uranus fell, ruled over love and desire, forces as destructive as they were irresistible. Her beauty bent gods and mortals alike, driving them toward pleasure, obsession, and ruin. Hearts shattered in her wake. Wars ignited because of her favor, though married to Hephaestus, the lame smith god who forged wonders beneath the earth. She gave herself to Ari, god of war. Together, they embodied passion without restraint and conflict without resolution, a union that revealed how closely love and violence are entwined. Hermes, quick-footed and clever, son of Zeus, moved freely between all worlds, messenger, thief, trickster, and guide of souls. He ruled over boundaries and delighted in crossing them. No door barred him, no realm denied him entry. He slipped from Olympus to Hades, from battlefield to feast, carrying secrets, bargains, and stolen truths. A smile always lingered on his lips, for Hermes understood what the others often forgot, that rules exist to be tested. This new pantheon did not rule from a distance. The Olympians were not silent architects watching from beyond the sky. They were present, intrusive, deeply involved. They chose favorites, punished insults, and waged quiet wars through mortal hands. Unlike the Titans, who embodied raw elemental force, the Olympians were reflections of humanity raised to divine scale. Their loves were tangled and destructive. Their grudges never faded. Their pride was boundless. They lifted cities into greatness and shattered them without warning. Sacrifices burned for their favor. Oracles murmured their will. Every home kept aflame for Hestia, goddess of the hearth, who asked for little and offered peace in return. Yet, beneath all their splendor, lay a truth they could not escape. Their power, immense as it was, had limits. They could be bound by oaths, tricked by mortals, eroded by time. Even Zeus, in all his glory, carried the same fear that had doomed his father, the terror that one day a child of his own blood would rise to overthrow him. For this reason, his union with Thetis was abandoned. She was given instead to a mortal, Peleus, ensuring that Achilles, her son, would burn brightly and die young, never ascending beyond his place. In this, the Olympians were no different from men. They feared loss. They clung to power. They fought to preserve an order they knew was fragile. For a time, they ruled. Their names were carved into marble, their deeds sung in countless songs, their symbols stamped into shields and coins. The age of heroes had passed, but the gods still governed the world of men. And yet, from distant lands and whispered prophecies came the faint suggestion of change. New gods stirred beyond the horizon. the temples would not remain full forever. Olympus still stood, but its foundations were no longer unquestioned. The Olympians were mighty, but they were not unchallenged. Even as temples to Zeus reached toward the sky, and Athena's wisdom shaped the minds of city-states, darker gods walked the earth. Gods of wine and madness, of death and rebirth, of truth spoken only in secret groves and torch-lit caves. Chief among them was Dionysus, the last to claim a seat on Olympus, and the only god who truly stood between civilization and the wild. Dionysus was no ordinary deity. His very birth defied law and order. He was the son of Zeus and Selene, a mortal princess. When Selene, deceived by Hera, demanded Zeus reveal his true divine form, she was consumed by his thunderous radiance. From her ashes, Zeus tore the unborn child and sewed him into his own thigh. Months later, Dionysus was born again. Twice born, they called him. And from that second birth, his path was unlike any other gods, unlike any other Olympians. He was not raised on Olympus, nor shaped by its polished halls and rigid order. His childhood unfolded far from thrones and councils, in the remote edges of the world, among the nymphs of Nyssa, in shadowed caves said to lie beyond the known lands of India, in the company of satyrs and maenads, creatures of instinct and excess, who taught him rhythm before law and ecstasy before obedience. He did not learn to rule, he learned to wander. He carried no scepter and claimed no fixed seat. He moved with flute and vine, crowned in ivy, his followers trailing behind him in wild procession. Where his feet touched the earth, vineyards rose unbidden, and reason loosened its grip. He was not merely the god of wine, but of transformation itself, of the fragile, sacred line where civilization frays into chaos, where joy spills into madness, where the self dissolves and something truer takes its place. He gave laughter, yes, but he also unleashed frenzy. And in frenzy, men and women forgot their names, their stations, and sometimes even their humanity. When he came to Greece, he was not welcomed. Cities mocked his rights, kings closed their gates and forbade his worship. Order feared what it could not control. Dionysus answered not with armies, but with consequence. One by one, those who denied him were undone. In Thebes, the land of his mother, he returned in disguise. A young stranger, a wanderer. His followers stirred the city with drums and cries, unsettling the streets with songs that refused silence. Pantheus, the rigid king, saw only disorder. He sought to crush the madness, arresting Dionysus, laughing at his rights, and vowing to expose the women who danced upon the hills. But the god did not resist. He waited. He led the king into the forest, dressed as a woman, stripped of authority and certainty. There, lost in divine trance, Pantheus met his end. His own mother, Agave, possessed by holy madness, led the Maenads in tearing him apart. Only when she returned to the city, carrying her son's head upon a thyrsus, did the spell break. The truth fell upon Thebes like a shadow that could not be lifted. Dionysus was not mocked again. He was the god of theater as much as intoxication, of masks and performance, of truths hidden within lies and revealed only through illusion. His festivals became the beating heart of Greek drama. Tragedy and comedy were born in his name, staged before thousands who wept and laughed at reflections of themselves. Through song and mask, the Greeks spoke fears they could not confess and desires they dared not name. To worship Dionysus was not to kneel before power, but to surrender completely to experience. With Dionysus came something new to the Greek world: mystery cults, faiths of initiation, secrecy, rebirth. Unlike the public rites of Olympus, these cults promised something intimate, personal. In the Eleusinian mysteries, followers of Data and Persephone reenacted the descent into death and the return to life of a daughter lost and found again. In darkness and silence, they learned that loss was not final and that return was possible. The Orphics, followers of the poet Orpheus, told a deeper story. They spoke of Dionysus himself as a god torn apart and reborn, a god whose suffering carried wisdom, a god whose rites offered escape from the endless turning of rebirth. These mysteries did not deny the Olympians. They slipped beneath them, quieter, older in spirit. They offered hope where thunder offered only command. They whispered that the soul might endure beyond flesh, beyond memory, beyond death itself. With that whisper, certainty began to erode. Even on Olympus, cracks appeared. The gods quarreled more fiercely. Ares and Athena fought for the loyalty of warriors. Apollo loved too deeply and too often, leaving behind death and transformation in the stories of Hyanthus, Daphne, and Coronis. Aphrodite, jealous and wounded by her own power, punished mortals for the desires she herself had ignited. The gods began to mirror humanity more clearly than ever before. Proud, fickle, wounded, lost. In Dionysus, the Olympian order found both its reflection and its unraveling. He was divine, yet lived as a wanderer. He brought joy, yet left madness in his wake. He humbled kings and lifted peasants. And most of all, he transformed the nature of divinity itself. The gods were no longer distant and eternal figures beyond reach. Through ritual, through wine, through song and sacred madness, mortals felt the breath of the divine within themselves, not in temples of stone, but in the depths of their own being. Beyond the wine-dark seas and the white columns of marble, the world was shifting. New power stirred. Rome was rising. Old altars would not burn forever. Olympus still stood, but the wind had begun to change upon its peak. The Olympians, for all their glory, never confined their stories to the heights of heaven. They descended again and again into the world of men as lovers, deceivers, warriors, and judges. They mingled with mortals and left behind more than omens or prophecies. They left children. These children of gods and mortals, demigods, were born into a world that could neither fully accept them nor entirely reject them. Too divine for peace, too human for eternity. Some became kings, some became monsters, and a few became legends whose names would outlive the temples of their divine parents. Others monsters, but a few became legends. Their stories endured longer than the walls of Troy and outlasted even the temples of the gods who sired them. Foremost among these was Heracles, son of Zeus and Almon, a mortal queen born into a world of intrigue and power. His very conception was shaped by deception. Zeus came to Almon wearing the face of her husband, stretching the night until it doubled upon itself, bending time to satisfy desire. From that stolen night, Heracles was born, already marked by the unrelenting hatred of Hera. For Hea, queen of heaven, could never forgive betrayal, and she turned the life of Heracles into a furnace of suffering meant to break him. Even as an infant, danger found him. While he lay in his cradle, Hera sent serpents to end his life. The child did not cry. He reached out and crushed them with his bare hands, a warning written in flesh and bone. Heracles grew into a man of impossible strength, but it was not strength that defined his legend. It was punishment. In a madness sent by the gods themselves, vengeance twisted into tragedy, and he slaughtered his own wife and children. When clarity returned, it left him hollow and shattered. Seeking cleansing, he went to the oracle at Delhi. There he was commanded to serve Eurystheus, a petty king, and to complete 12 labors that no mortal should survive. Each labor was a confrontation with death. He wrestled the Nemean lion, whose hide no blade could pierce, and wore its skin as armor. He slew the Lernaean hydra, cauterizing each writhing neck as it fell. He captured the Arianthian boar alive, cleansed the stables of Algus in a single day, drove away the style birds, and subdued the Cretan bull. He took the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, seized the cattle of Geryon from the edge of the world, gathered the golden apples of the Hesperids, and descended into Hades itself to bring back the hound Cerberus. These were not displays of power. They were trials of endurance. Each labor stripped something from him and forged something in return. Through suffering, Heracles became more than a hero. He became a testament to human resilience, to pain transformed through effort. At his end, poisoned by a robe soaked in the blood of a centaur, Heracles chose his own death. He built his funeral pyre and climbed upon it willingly, leaving mortality behind in flame. The gods took him to Olympus, where even Hea at last accepted him as divine. He became the only mortal to join the pantheon. A god not born of serenity, but forged in agony. Yet Heracles was not the first, nor the only demigod whose story shaped the fate of mortals. Long before him came Perseus, another son of Zeus, born to Dia, who was imprisoned in a bronze tower because of a prophecy that her child would one day kill her father. Fate, once set in motion, cannot be contained. Zeus came to her not as a man, but as a shower of gold, and from that union Perseus was born, cast into the sea in a wooden chest. Mother and child survived by chance and mercy, rescued by a fisherman whose kindness altered the course of history. Again, desire bred danger. Polyctus, a king consumed by lust, sought Dia and sent Perseus on a path meant to kill him. Ordered to bring back the head of Medusa, whose gaze turned men to stone, Perseus accepted a task meant to end him. The gods intervened. Hermes gave him a blade. Athena offered a polished shield. He stole the eye of the Grey Sisters, the ancient watchers who shared a single vision, and forced from them the Gorgon's hiding place. Guided by Athena, Perseus struck without looking, using reflection instead of sight, and severed Medusa's head as she slept. From her blood sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysa, born of violence and wonder. Perseus escaped death again and again. On his return, he rescued Andromeda from a sea monster, married her, and founded a line of kings. Through blood and destiny, his lineage would one day give rise to Heracles, binding their stories into a single thread woven by the gods themselves. There were others. Theseus, son of Poseidon or Aegis, depending on the telling, who slew the Minotaur in the labyrinth of Caucasus and brought Athens its first taste of empire. Bellerophon, rider of Pegasus, who destroyed the Chimera but flew too close to the heavens and fell for his pride. Atalanta, raised by bears, swift as the wind, a hunter unmatched by men, sometimes said to be the daughter of Artemis herself, who outran suitors and killed beasts, yet was undone by love and distraction. The demigods were never granted peace. Their blood burned too brightly for a mortal life, and too weakly for eternity. The gods watched them with pride and with fear, for each one tested the boundary between Olympus and earth. Mortals worshipped them not only for their victories, but for their suffering. They bled, they failed, they endured, and in that endurance, they became immortal in a way the gods never could, through story, triumphs, but for their struggles. They were remembered not because they conquered, but because they endured. They suffered, they bled, and sometimes they died forgotten by the gods who had shaped them. Yet through that suffering, they achieved a kind of immortality no god could claim, not through temples or thunder, but through story. As the memory of Troy dimmed and the dust settled over its fallen walls, as cities rose and collapsed beneath the weight of time, the tales of these children of gods endured. They were carved into stone and bronze. They filled amphitheaters and temple friezes. They echoed through poems recited by firelight and plays performed before vast crowds. And though the gods remained on Olympus, distant and increasingly silent, it was in the lives of their mortal-born children that humanity found its clearest reflection, flawed, courageous, doomed, and, in fleeting moments, glorious. In the world of Greek myth, power did not belong solely to gods or heroes. Beneath every choice and every death, every victory and every sorrow, there moved something older and deeper, a force that hummed quietly beneath existence itself. Fate. It was not a god, though even the gods feared it. It was not a law, though it governed the divine as surely as it governed men. Fate was a truth, a force like gravity, unseen, relentless, woven into the bones of the world. The Greeks called it Moira, and sometimes it wore faces. The Moirae, three sisters who ruled every life without exception. Cloth spun the thread of existence from nothing. Lysus measured its length, deciding how long a life would stretch beneath the sun, and Atropos, the one who could not be turned, cut the thread when its time was done. Even Zeus, king of Olympus, stood bound by their work. He could rage, he could plead, but when Atropos lifted her shears, no power in heaven or earth could stay her hand. If fate ruled all, then what hope had man? The answer lay not in defiance, but in knowledge, in omens and oracles, in the strange and subtle language through which the gods allowed glimpses of what was to come. The Greeks did not believe fate could be changed. They believed it could be understood. To see the future was not to escape it, but to brace oneself against it, to prepare the soul, even if the body could not be spared. The most renowned oracle in all of Greece stood at Delhi. There, Apollo spoke through the Pythia, a woman seated upon a tripod above a steaming chasm in the stone floor of the temple. She inhaled the vapors rising from the earth, slipped into trance, and delivered the gods' words in fragments and riddles. Kings came seeking conquest. Generals sought victory. Ordinary men begged only for survival. But Apollo never offered certainty. His prophecies cut like blades, sharp on both edges. Chrysis, king of Lydia, once asked whether he should wage war against the Persians. The oracle told him that if he crossed the river, he would destroy a great empire. He did not understand that the empire would be his own. Oedipus was told he would kill his father and marry his mother. His parents tried to escape the prophecy by abandoning him. He fled his adopted home to avoid the same fate, only to walk directly into its fulfillment. The oracle had spoken true. It was human interpretation that proved fatal. There were other oracles as well. At Dodna, where the rustling leaves of sacred oaks carried the will of Zeus. At Delos, where Leto gave birth to Apollo and Artemis beneath the open sky. At Ammon in Libya, and in countless smaller shrines scattered across the land. Dreams, animal entrails, the flight of birds, the trembling of a flame, all could speak if one knew how to listen. In war, omens were sought before every battle. Lightning in a clear sky, a sudden cry of crows, a sneeze at the wrong moment. These were not trifles. They were warnings, messages from the divine. A general who ignored them risked not only defeat, but punishment written into the fabric of the cosmos itself. Sacrifices marked every turning point of life. before voyages at sea, before births and weddings, before the crossing of borders, both physical and unseen. The entrails of goats and the livers of oxen were examined by seers who read the will of the gods in dark, wet patterns of muscle and blood. The art of divination became a form of power. Seers like Calchas, who guided the Greeks at Troy, or Tiresias, the blind prophet of Thebes, wielded influence equal to kings. Tiresias, touched by both male and female life, was said to have lived across 7 generations. His wisdom was unmatched. His visions often carried a curse, for knowledge came without mercy. To ask was to know, and to know was often to suffer. Oracles and omens were never mere superstition. They revealed a deeper truth at the heart of Greek belief. Mortals were not in control. No matter the strength of a hero, the nobility of a bloodline, or the purity of intent, fate moved forward without hesitation. And in that understanding, the Greeks found their meaning, not in victory over destiny, but in dignity beneath it. No matter how great the hero, how exalted the lineage, how steadfast the heart claimed itself to be, the wheel of fate never ceased its turning. It moved without pause, without judgment, grinding down kings and beggars alike. And in its endless rotation, every life, sooner or later, was bent, fractured, or erased. The ancients understood this well. Prophecy, to them, was never a weapon. It offered no shield. It granted no escape. It was awareness. And awareness, when it arrived too late, often carried the same weight as catastrophe itself. Still, men sought it. They climbed steep mountain paths with blistered feet and bowed heads. They carried offerings of gold, wine, and goat blood, their hands trembling as they spoke their questions aloud. They did not come believing fate could be undone. They came because facing what was coming felt better than meeting it blind. To know the storm was approaching did not halt the rain, but it allowed a man to stand beneath it with open eyes. In that fragile space, suspended between understanding and helplessness, the Greeks found meaning. Their stories were never about conquering destiny. They were about standing upright within it. Even the gods themselves watched the loom of fate in silence, unable to cut threads they despised or save those they loved. Hector marched into battle, knowing death waited for him, and still he fastened his armor. Achilles sailed toward Troy, aware that return was denied to him, and still he went. Oedipus fled from prophecy with desperate resolve, only to fulfill it step by step. And year after year, the Patheia continued to breathe her riddles into the smoke, her voice carrying the chill of a world that had already chosen its course. To the ancient Greeks, death was not the end of a story. It was only the end of breath. What followed was neither heaven nor hell as later faiths would imagine, but something older, quieter, and far more inevitable. Beneath the living world stretched a vast domain where all souls traveled in the end, great and insignificant, just and cruel, remembered and forgotten. This realm was called Hades, named for the god who ruled it. And though it burned with no eternal fire, wielded no pitchforks, and housed no horned demons, it inspired a fear so profound that mortals avoided speaking the ruler's name aloud. They called him Pluton instead, the wealthy one. For all riches rose from beneath the earth, just as all lives eventually sank into it. The underworld was not shaped by reason or symmetry. It followed the logic of memory and myth. At its threshold flowed 5 rivers, each a boundary both physical and spiritual. Styx carried hatred and sacred oaths that even gods dared not break. Acheron flowed with sorrow. Phlegethon burned with fire. Cocytus echoed with lamentation. And Lethe carried forgetfulness, erasing pain, identity, in time itself. Souls arrived as shadows, thin and voiceless, stripped of flesh and warmth. Such beings, called Psyche, crossed the waters with the aid of Charon, the ferryman. For a single coin, he would carry them across the river of sorrow. Those denied proper burial or lacking payment wandered the shores for years beyond counting, whispering and weeping, neither alive nor fully dead. At the gates of the realm waited Cerberus, the three-headed hound. He did not threaten the dead. He ensured they did not leave. Beyond him stretched the plains of Asphodel, gray and endless, where most souls drifted in quiet forgetfulness, murmuring like leaves stirred by an unseen wind. Yet not all destinies ended there. The underworld had judges: Minos, Rhadamanthus, Iacchus. Each soul was weighed without passion or mercy. The wicked were cast into Tartarus, a chasm deeper than the prison of the Titans themselves. There, punishments mirrored crimes with cruel precision. Sisyphus strained eternally beneath his rolling stone. Tantalus stood forever thirsty beside unreachable water. Ixion spun upon his burning wheel without rest. A rare few, deemed worthy of peace, passed into the Elysian fields. There, gentle winds moved through green meadows, untouched by decay. Heroes rested with their memories intact, their deeds honored without envy or fear. Fewer still were offered rebirth, drinking from the waters of Lethe and returning to the world cleansed of former lives, beginning the cycle once more. In later mystery traditions, some even dreamed of escaping the wheel entirely, ascending beyond flesh and fate. But such hopes were distant and uncertain, whispered more often than believed. At the center of this realm stood Hades himself, stern, silent, a king without ornament or vanity. He did not demand prayers. He did not bargain with mortals. He did not intrude upon the living world. He ruled, and his rule did not change. He was not evil, as later ages would claim, but fixed, unyielding, the still shadow cast by Zeus's thunder and Poseidon's tide. And beside him stood Persephone, queen of the underworld. Her story, more than any other, revealed the strange dual nature of death in Greek thought, not as an ending, but as a passage bound forever to loss, return, and remembrance. In the ancient imagination, Persephone was remembered first as the daughter of Data, the goddess who kept the earth alive. She was youth made visible, spring given form, one clear season. As she wandered through fields, gathering flowers, the ground itself betrayed her. The earth split apart, not slowly, but with sudden violence. From the rupture rose Hades in his dark chariot, silent and absolute. He seized her without warning, without consent, and vanished with her into the depths below. When Data learned what had been taken from her, grief hardened into refusal. She did not weep softly. She withdrew her blessing from the world. Fields cracked and browned. Crops failed before they could ripen. Rivers thinned and dried. Hunger spread across cities and villages alike. No prayer softened her resolve. No sacrifice moved her heart. She would not allow the earth to breathe again until her daughter was returned. At last, Zeus intervened, not out of mercy, but necessity. The world itself was dying. He sent Hermes, swift and silver-tongued, to the realm below to negotiate what force could not reclaim. Persephone was found, but she could not simply be taken. In the underworld, she had eaten the seeds of a pomegranate. Some said 6, some said only 1. The number mattered less than the act itself. By tasting the fruit of that realm, she had bound herself to it. The solution became a law of existence rather than a victory. Persephone would divide her time. Part of the year she would remain beneath the earth beside Hades. During those months, Data's sorrow would return, and the world would grow cold and barren. When Persephone rose again to the surface, the goddess of harvest would rejoice, and life would surge back into the soil. Thus, death and renewal became inseparable, not an ending, but a rhythm, not a sentence, but a cycle. Over time, Persephone changed. She was no longer remembered only as a stolen daughter. In the depths, she became a ruler in her own right, quiet, observant, absolute in her domain. She walked among the shades, not as a prisoner, but as a queen of mysteries, her authority unspoken yet unquestioned. In the rites held beyond Athens, known as the Eleusinian Mysteries, her descent and return were reenacted year after year. Those initiated were promised more than fertile fields. They were offered the hope that the soul itself might endure, that loss was not final, and that return was possible beyond death. The underworld, however, was not entirely closed. A handful of mortals crossed its threshold and lived to remember it. Orpheus entered with nothing but his voice, singing past Cerberus and softening even the hearts of Hades and Persephone. Yet he failed at the final moment, turning back too soon, losing Eurydice forever. Heracles forced his way into the depths and returned with Cerberus as proof of his labor. Odysseus, guided by Circe, offered blood to the dead and summoned the shades of Tiresias, Achilles, and Agamemnon. From them he learned a truth stripped of comfort. Death held no glory. It was final. Better to live in chains than to rule among shadows, Achilles told him, once the greatest of all Greeks. From such beliefs grew ritual and care. The Greeks honored their dead meticulously. Coins were placed for Charon. Weapons and wine were buried beside the fallen. Songs were sung. Libations poured at the family hearth. The dead were never considered fully gone. They lingered in dreams. They sent signs. And in rare, dangerous rites involving blood and words best left unspoken, they could even be called back for answers that often carried a price. The underworld stood as a reflection of life itself. Memory without appeal, justice without mercy. It promised no paradise for virtue and no inferno for disbelief. It simply was, vast, dark, unchanging, ruled by a god who did not desire love or devotion, only silence. In that stillness, the Greeks glimpsed eternity, and through stories of Hades and Persephone, of judgment and shadow, of rivers and thrones beneath the earth, they placed death within the order of the cosmos, not as punishment, but as passage. Even the gods, they believed, were not immune to time, not in memory, not in power, not in reverence. Every mythic age reaches a moment when the divine begins to fade, when figures once vivid blur at the edges of thought, and thrones forged in thunder are worn smooth by centuries. For the gods of Olympus, that retreat did not begin with battle or prophecy, but with Rome, and with a world growing restless beneath the weight of ancient stories. The Romans did not shatter the Greek gods. They absorbed them, renamed them, recast them in the image of empire. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera became Juno, Poseidon became Neptune. It was transformation disguised as reverence. Olympus was admired, but reshaped to serve order, hierarchy, and conquest. Jupiter thundered not from wild peaks, but from the Capitoline hill, clothed as a lawgiver. Dionysus lost his raw frenzy and became Bacchus. Athena's fierce autonomy softened into the civic reason of Minerva. In poetry and history, the myths endured. Ovid retold them in elegant Latin, rich with irony and grace. Virgil shaped the gods into instruments of destiny, guiding Rome's founding from behind the veil. Yet something essential had changed. In Homer, the gods walked the battlefield, raw and visible in dust and blood. In Roman telling, they grew distant, symbolic, disciplined. They no longer burned with the same immediacy. They had become ideas more than presences. And so, without a final war, without a single cataclysm, the age of the Olympians began its long decline. Not erased, but transformed. Not destroyed, but remembered. Their power slipped quietly from worship into story, where it would survive in a different form, waiting for future minds to listen again. As centuries passed, the gods themselves began to change. They did not vanish at once. They shifted. They receded. Their presence, once immediate and overwhelming, grew abstract, distant, filtered through ceremony and power. They no longer strode freely through battlefields or whispered directly into mortal ears. Slowly, they became ideas rather than forces, symbols rather than companions. Politics dressed them in robes of order, stripped them of their wildness, and bound them to institutions that spoke more of empire than eternity. As Rome expanded its borders, it expanded its pantheon as well. New divinities arrived not as curiosities, but as challengers. From the east came Mithras, born from stone, bound to secrecy, a god whose followers spoke of cosmic struggle and sacrifice. From Egypt came Isis, veiled in ritual and mystery, a mother of magic and rebirth, whose worship promised personal devotion rather than public spectacle. From Judea came something radically different, a single god without image or form, invisible, absolute, a god who tolerated no rivals, rejected idols, and dismantled the very idea of divine families and quarreling thrones. These faiths did more than compete with Olympus. They undermined its foundations. The old gods had ruled through appetite, lineage, and hierarchy. The new beliefs spoke of moral law, unity, and salvation. They offered coherence where myth offered contradiction. At the same time, the mythic world began to erode from within. Philosophy sharpened its questions. Thinkers like Xenophanes ridiculed gods shaped like men, arguing that if animals imagined the divine, they would fashion gods in their own likeness. Plato admired the beauty of myth, yet doubted its truth, insisting that true divinity must be perfect, just, and free from petty jealousy. Epicurus went further, claiming the gods existed but were indifferent, unconcerned with human suffering, and that fear of divine punishment was a chain forged by ignorance. Even Stoicism, disciplined and severe, relocated the divine into reason itself, the logos that governed all things without face or passion. By the time emperors were declared gods and temples were raised to living men, the boundary between myth and power dissolved entirely. Worship became loyalty, ritual became politics. The ancient gods endured, but increasingly as symbols rather than presences. Their temples remained, yet belief thinned within their walls. Farmers still offered grain to Data. Sailors still murmured prayers to Poseidon before setting sail. But fewer truly believed that the gods walked among them. Olympus still burned, but the flame wavered, dim and unsteady. Then came the final turning, not through conquest, not through prophecy, but through faith transformed into revolution. Christianity, once a small and persecuted sect, spread quietly across the empire. It carried no armies. It wielded no thunder. It moved through words, through suffering, through promises of redemption. Its God was singular, unseen, all-encompassing. Its stories did not dwell on divine rivalries or romantic betrayals, but on sin, forgiveness, and salvation. Slowly, old sanctuaries emptied, new churches rose, hymns replaced hymns, priests denounced the Olympians as falsehoods, shadows, or demons of an earlier age. Under the reign of Theodosius I, the transformation became law. Pagan temples were closed. Sacrifices were forbidden. The Olympic Games were abolished. And still, there was no divine war, no clash of heavens, no final battle between Zeus and Christ. The gods did not resist. They simply receded, like daylight at dusk. Their statues weathered in silence. Altars grew cold. Marble cracked. Ivy climbed where incense once burned. What remained were the stories, not as faith, but as memory. Children learned of Heracles in classrooms, not at shrines. Artists painted Athena without kneeling before her. The gods who once commanded storms and destinies became narratives, haunting and beautiful, echoes of a world that no longer believed but still remembered. And yet, they endured. Through poetry, through art, through the architecture of imagination itself. They returned in Renaissance canvases, in Enlightenment debates, in romantic longing, in modern retellings. They became archetypes, war and wisdom, love and betrayal, pride and ruin. By giving their gods human faces, the Greeks had ensured their survival, not as rulers of the sky, but as mirrors of the soul. The temples fell, the oracles fell silent, but the myths did not die. They softened into echoes, barely heard at first, like a distant string vibrating in the wind. Then, across centuries, they grew louder again, as new generations listened, because myths, unlike empires, are not bound by stone or sword. They live in imagination, and in that realm, the gods never truly disappear. During the long centuries of Christian dominance, the Olympians were not worshipped, but neither were they erased. Monks copied ancient manuscripts by candlelight. Scholars preserved Homer and Hesiod, Euripides and Sophocles, even as they condemned the beliefs these works once sustained. The old stories slept within libraries and margins, waiting. They waited for a world ready to read them, not as doctrine, but as meaning. The old gods endured, not within sanctuaries filled with incense, but inside libraries where dust gathered quietly between sermons and philosophical treatises. Their names rested on parchment, copied by careful hands, preserved not by devotion, but by memory. They waited there, patient, unseen, until the world was ready to look back in order to move forward. Then came the Renaissance, a great turning of the wheel. Europe shifted its gaze toward the past, not in retreat, but in renewal. In the courts of Florence, in the vaulted chapels of Rome, in the minds of thinkers such as Petrarch and Erasmus, the gods emerged once more, not as objects of worship, but as symbols of human nature itself. Aphrodite returned wrapped in light and seashells on painted walls. Apollo reappeared, carved in marble, bow poised, body balanced between strength and grace. Poets summoned the muse again, not to pray, but to understand. Myth was reborn through stone and pigment, not through sacrifice or flame. The gods no longer commanded the heavens. They ruled the imagination. As the age of enlightenment unfolded, reason challenged superstition, and certainty replaced fear. Yet the myths did not vanish. They adapted. They were analyzed, translated, debated. To Voltaire, they became allegory. To Goethe, reflections of the inner life. Myth shifted from belief to interpretation, from ritual to inquiry. Romanticism followed, restless and emotional, hungry for what reason could not provide. Writers returned to tragic figures and impossible choices, to Oedipus and Antigone, to Orpheus and Eurydice. In these stories, they found questions that refused resolution. What governs our lives? What binds us to one another? What price is paid for love, for defiance, for truth? The modern age carried myth even further. No longer confined to classrooms or ancient texts, it spread across new mediums, into novels and films, into psychology and popular culture. Carl Jung recognized the gods as enduring patterns of the human mind, archetypes that resurfaced again and again beneath changing names. James Joyce threaded ancient journeys through modern streets. Contemporary storytellers reimagined Olympus for new generations, placing gods among skyscrapers and subways. In graphic panels and cinema screens, divine figures returned clad not in robes, but in armor shaped for a new age. Yet, beneath every reinvention, the core remained. The sailor still wandered, the strong man still labored, the queen of the underworld still rose each spring. These stories were not erased, they were translated. From one language to another, from one era to the next, from one imagination into countless others. Because myth is not static, it lives. It shifts with those who carry it forward. What the Greeks offered was never merely a collection of gods. It was a way of seeing, a framework for understanding the world, a language for confronting death, a means of honoring beauty and wrestling with the self. Their gods were flawed, deeply so, and in that imperfection, they reflected humanity. They revealed not ideals, but possibilities, the cost of choice, the danger of pride, the solace of ritual, the tension between freedom and fate. Even now, in an age shaped by science and silence, these stories continue to whisper. They surface in tales of chosen heroes and fallen figures, in the rhythm of seasons turning, in the story of a daughter descending and a world holding its breath, in a ruler who defies prophecy and loses everything, in a grieving mother whose sorrow dims the sun. The names may change, the settings may shift, but the truths endure. The gods did not vanish, they withdrew. They stepped out of temples and into memory. They moved into books and songs, into dreams and shared stories, into every narrative that dares to look beyond the limits of the mortal world. They are not dead. They have simply changed their dwelling. Now the story closes. The wind on Mount Olympus is cold. The sacred fires have burned to ash. The oracle halls stand silent. Yet the myths remain, waiting, remembered, alive. Good night, echoes of the gods, where myths breathe. Gods in memory. Ancient voices linger. The gods remember,